You're watching 535.
This is 535.
535.
You're watching 535.
535.
535.
535.
We're live on Capitol Hill, and 535 starts right now.
It should be the broader component. Here we are, May 14th, 2026. It's Thursday here on Capitol Hill for U.S. Senators and for House members so far. This may be the day they try to fly away after they do the day's business. But there's a lot of business to get to today. In the U.S. Senate, they're talking about crypto legislation, which means they have to explain to people what crypto is before they try to legislate on it. There's going to be a fierce debate in the Senate on that today, and a lot of amendments, including some back and forth about whether the banks are being marginalized by crypto legislation. In the U.S. House, they will discuss matters of war late in the day. They have slated 4 p.m. Eastern time. Votes in the House about 6 p.m. is when they should wrap up. And then, if all goes to plan, House members are back on Wednesday of next week. Let's start off with Seth Magaziner, Democrat from Rhode Island, the western half, the glorious half of Rhode Island. He's joining us to talk about legislation to impact American workers. First of all, Congressman, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. Tell us about the legislation which will provide more leave time for more workers. Explain how it works.
Well, listen, Americans work hard, right? We have a grinded out culture, and that's great, but everyone who works hard for a living deserves to take some time off. Maybe it's a flat tire and you got to take your car in. Maybe your kid has a parent-teacher conference day, or maybe you just are burnt out and need a vacation. And the United States is the only developed country in the world that does not guarantee vacation time for all workers. As a matter of fact, 26 million Americans get no paid time off from work at all for any reason. So our bill, the PTO Act it's called, would guarantee all full-time workers at least 10 days of paid vacation per year. Now, to put that in context, every country in Europe guarantees at least 20 days. Some countries guarantee 30 days. In the US right now, we guarantee 0. So as a start, we think 10 days so that every American can take some time off when they want to is just the right thing to do for American workers.
Let's unpack it a little bit so we can find out where some of the hurdles are to make this law. The 26 million people you referenced, what groups does that include? Would those be gig workers, some part-time or non-union? Who are we talking about?
So disproportionately hospitality, food service, et cetera.
Tipped workers.
Yeah, in many cases, disproportionately women and people of color. But really all across the economy, there are people who, again, work hard and don't get to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding because every time there's been a major technological advancement, the invention of electricity, the invention of modern home appliances, the internet, now AI, people all say, well, people aren't going to have to work so hard anymore. But that's just not the way the economy works. There's always an incentive for employers to get as much out of their employees as they can. And the only way you can guarantee that working people can enjoy the fruits of their labor is to mandate a certain amount of time off, whether it's weekends, holidays, or paid vacation, which is what we need.
This would form some type of mandate on employers. I mean, this would form necessarily a mandate on employers. What about the criticism you're putting an unfunded mandate on employers who we do want to hire people, including our wives, husbands, kids, and parents?
Yeah, so first of all, if you're an employer out there who's not giving any paid time off at all to your employees, you should. But keep in mind too, most employers are. Most employers are already doing the right thing and allowing their employees some time off. Those employers who are doing the right thing shouldn't be held at a disadvantage. They shouldn't be at a competitive disadvantage for doing the right thing by their employees.
Or are they at a competitive advantage because they're offering the PTO and they're getting better employees?
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you too, I mean, I mentioned the hospitality industry. It's a mixed bag because, in places like Rhode Island where we have a big tourism industry, I think there's actually a lot of support within hospitality for national paid time off. because it'll help with travel and tourism and help boost the economy that way as well. But listen, fundamentally for me, more than anything, this is about fairness to working people. People who work hard for a living. Burnout is real. Like, you talk to anyone across America who works for a living, people are burnt out. They want to be able to take some time off. Certainly if they're sick or if there's a medical emergency, but even just to get a day to relax. There's nothing wrong with that.
You're going to get feedback on this proposal, you probably already have, about maybe this impacts the stability of the labor market. Are people going to want to hire if they have this new mandate coming down from you? It's college graduation season. How do you describe the labor market right now? If somebody says, hey, we're in a soft labor market, people aren't hiring enough, we can't add this responsibility, do you think it's a soft labor market that would be impacted as much?
Well, listen, I think fundamentally over time, it will be better for quality of life and better for working people to be able to take some time off. And again, I'm not talking about 20 or 30 days a year, which is what everyone in Europe gets. I think 10 days is a reasonable compromise. And I will say support for the bill is growing within the caucus. Just in the last couple of weeks, the number of co-sponsors of the bill has increased dramatically, and the American people want this. The Brookings Institute recently released a poll where they showed that more than 7 in 10 Americans support this bill, support paid vacation for all workers.
You have caucus support, if I'm not mistaken, it's dozens of co-sponsors, which is not a small thing. It does set the table for a Democratic majority to move on that swiftly if you've got the co-sponsors lined up. What's the bridge building to Republicans on this? At some point, at the end of the day, you're going to need that.
Well, listen, I think the bridge building is going to come from the broad support of the American people for this bill. I mentioned earlier, the Brookings Institute shows overwhelming support. Another poll by Data for Progress showed 80% support for this bill, including a majority of Republican voters. So I think the next stage is going to be taking the argument to the American people and getting the American people to reach out to their members of Congress and let them know that this should be a priority. I think this is a good sleeper issue. You know, in politics, people who are running for office are always looking for these 80-20 or 70-30 issues that have overwhelming popularity across the ideological spectrum. Another bill of mine banning members of Congress from trading stocks is an example of that, like an 80-20 or like 90-10 issue. This is one of those, you know, again, 80-20 type issues that I think a lot of people around here haven't caught on to yet, and once they realize how popular this is, I think you're going to see support grow. And again, we've gained a lot of momentum just in the last few weeks. On the left, the Congressional Progressive Caucus just included this as one of 10 bills as part of their economic agenda. I'm actually not even a member of that caucus, but they included my bill anyway, which I'm very grateful to Greg Kassar and the team there for. Yesterday, the Democratic Women's Caucus, which includes not just progressives, but also moderate and conservative Democratic women, also endorsed the bill. And I predict we'll see some Republican support here in Congress as well, because we know that the Republican support exists broadly across the country with voters. The data shows it.
Speaking with Seth Magaziner of Rhode Island, let me pivot to the Stock Act. You referenced the Stock Act. I want to get a sense of where that's going. You have this unicorn of a bipartisan coalition, a really different coalition behind the Stock Act to ban members of Congress from using their inside information to trade stocks. What's the trajectory for that, if not this year, next year?
Well, I've said from the beginning, and I still believe this is true, it's going to happen. The only question is whether it happens under Speaker Johnson or Speaker Jeffries. Members of Congress should not be trading stocks. The American people understand that the opportunity for corruption is just too high.
Are they aware of it? I mean, do you get a sense from your constituents they know that's happening?
100%. I get asked about it all the time. I don't trade individual stocks myself, but people know this is an issue because they understand, like, how can we be voting impartially on bills having to do with healthcare if members of Congress are trading drug company stocks or insurance company stocks? How can we vote on tech issues when they're trading, you know, tech stocks? Like, people understand that the opportunity for conflicts of interest and corruption are just too great. So to your point, we've put together a great coalition. I've worked very closely on this issue with Chip Roy, the Freedom Caucus Republican from Texas, Tim Burchett, another very conservative member, Pramila Jayapal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Like, we've got a great across the spectrum coalition of members that are working on this, but there's also a lot of entrenched opposition as well. So you asked me, where do I think this is going to go? The group I just mentioned, Roy, Burchett, Brian Fitzpatrick as well, AOC, Jayapal, myself, we've got a very strong bill that would ban members of Congress from trading stocks outright. Speaker Johnson refuses to put that on the floor. There's some talk that he may move like a very watered down version of it that would still allow some trading to occur. that's not going to be good enough for the American people. But if he doesn't do it, I have absolute faith that next year when Democrats are in the majority, which I believe we will, Hakeem Jeffries will move on this. He has said it publicly and privately numerous times that it will be at the top of the Democratic agenda in the new majority, and that he's committed to passing a real stock trading ban, not whatever watered down version Mike Johnson is contemplating. And
what's different in what you're characterizing as a watered down version? What do you believe is missing?
So the version that Mike Johnson has, at least tacitly put his support behind, would still allow members to own stocks with no limitations, and would also allow them to trade under certain situations. They could sell stocks at any point, that's not good enough, right? Like, it's not good enough if you say, well, okay, you're not allowed to buy, but you can still sell and you can still hold what you have. Like, I think to the average American who looks at that, they would realize that there's still potential for conflicts of interest. There's still opportunity for members to trade off of inside information, even if it's just a sell and not a buy. It's not good enough.
When you try to inform your constituents and the public about the need for this, about why we have to ban stock trading, do you have to do so delicately to ensure that, that both parties are shown to be exposed here and not fracture what's always going to be a fragile bipartisan coalition?
Yeah. So, yes and no. I mean, like, what I will say, again, Chip Roy, who I agree with almost nothing else on with him, right? He's been a good partner on this issue. And he and I agreed early on in this Congress that one thing that we would not do is call out individual members. Mm-hmm. So,
Gotcha.
When the media covers this, when others cover this, they always give case studies of high-profile members on both sides of the aisle who do lots of trading. Chip and I purposefully have not done that because we don't want this to turn into a partisan back and forth. We understand that in order to solve this,
you got to resist that temptation, because those granular examples are what tick people off.
Exactly. And so the only way we're going to get this done is on a bipartisan basis. There is no partisan, Republican-only or Democratic-only way to do this, because there is still a lot of entrenched opposition here. And look, those of us who support reform, who support banning members from trading stocks, we're very vocal about our support. Me and Chip and Pramila and AOC, we're talking about it all the time. The opponents are not so loud because they know they're on the unpopular side of the issue, but that doesn't mean that they're not here and that they're not working behind the scenes to try to sink this. And so it's going to have to be bipartisan, which is why I think those of us who are serious about getting something done on this are very careful not to call out individual members on the other party, no matter how tempting it may be sometimes.
We have a couple quick 1-minute questions, but I want to ask you about one more broader issue before we get to the fun questions, Congressman.
Yeah.
There was a moment at a hearing in which you questioned the Interior Secretary on Wednesday, Doug Burgum, about some of the administration's investments or lack thereof. Tell us what you were asking about and what you think came of it.
Yeah, well, listen, costs are too high, right? The price of electricity has skyrocketed. Gasoline is over $4.50 a gallon now. People can't afford their energy bills, right? Diesel, the cost of diesel is way up. And so I asked Secretary Burgum in that context, why is he blocking wind and solar energy projects from getting to the grid? Projects that could lower people's electricity bills, expand our supply of power. And he didn't give any sort of a compelling answer. He sort of stuck to this line about the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow.
You held up a battery.
Yeah, well, I reminded him that we have these things called batteries that have been around since Benjamin Franklin. And, batteries work even when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. But I also reminded him, more importantly, and I think this got under his skin a little bit, but it's the truth. When he was governor of North Dakota, he bragged about how they were scaling up wind energy in North Dakota. North Dakota is number 6 in the country for the percentage of their electricity that comes from wind. And he was very proud of that when he was governor. He promoted it, as he should have, because it was the right thing for the people of North Dakota. But now that he works for President Trump, he's done a complete 180. And I think he didn't like being reminded of the fact that he knows better. Who knows if Donald Trump believes these conspiracy theories about clean energy and all the rest that he's always spouting, but we know that Doug Burgum knows better. And so that was the point I was trying to make, is that if we're serious about bringing down energy costs in this country, then utility scale wind and solar is part of the answer. It's not the whole answer, and we know that, but for the administration to be blocking these projects from getting to the grid at a time when prices are too high is just unacceptable.
We've seen some of the oversight hearings the House has performed in the last few months. It was Pam Bondi, Ms. Kash Patel, Secretary Hegg said, it feels like on both sides it's a bit performative, if not a lot performative. Are you finding most of the hearings with most of the cabinet to be substantive, or are you finding most of it to be, I'm sorry, a squandering of valuable policy time for the performative nature of these hearings?
It depends. I mean, I think that when we have more reasonable witnesses who are willing to engage in good faith conversation, we do that. And I would say that is the bulk of the hearings that we have. Those ones don't tend to make it on the news at night, right? Because there's less drama. But you know, there are.
We are guilty of that.
Yeah.
We are guilty of that in legacy media.
But that being said, I think also part of our job is to make a case to the American people. And so when it comes to the administration blocking clean energy projects that could lower people's costs just because they're quote unquote too woke or whatever, like, we need to tell the American people what's going on, and this is a platform for us to expose that. So, you know, I'm always big on, whenever I'm preparing for a hearing, whether it's with Doug Burgum or Kristi Noem, who I had on my other committee on Homeland Security, or anyone else, we always go in, and the first question I ask myself is, what's the goal here? Is the goal to try to have an informed policy discussion, because there's a time and a place for that, or is the goal to show the American people something that is going on that is not right, for which there is no good explanation? And the goal will vary from hearing to hearing.
That could be a last-minute decision based on how it's going.
Yeah, I mean, particularly when you're in a party that's not in the majority, you also don't get a lot of notice. You know, you get only a couple of days to prep for these things before they occur. But I think it depends on the witness, it depends on the issue. And, you know, I don't believe in performance for performance sake, certainly, but I do think that these hearings offer an opportunity to show the American people what is really going on in their government.
All right, Seth Magaziner, we have just a couple quick questions. This is our 1 minute in honor of 1 minute. What's the best food you find when you're here and not in Rhode Island?
Oh God, that's really hard.
I'm going to ask you the other version too.
No, I was going to say, I mean, here in DC, I'd say DC's a good food town, but it does not compare to Rhode Island. I opt for quiet places here as opposed to like the best possible food. So, you know, you'll find me at Ted's Bulletin sometimes up in Barracks Row because it's kind of quiet and, you know, it's just a good spot.
Because sometimes it's not quiet here.
Exactly.
So you're looking for a quiet place to go. What about back home?
So Rhode Island is the best food state in the country, like bar none. Like, we've got incredible restaurants. So you like fresh seafood, go to Matunic Oyster Bar in South Kingstown. We got great Italian food. Federal Hill in my district in Providence is terrific. I would say if you want to know like kind of like the behind the scenes, like the secret, people go to Federal Hill for great Italian food, but there's another neighborhood called Knightsville in Cranston that also has a strip of incredible Italian restaurants.
Like a little Italy.
Exactly. It's you know, Federal Hill used to be like the main Italian neighborhood in the area, but a lot of the folks there moved out to Cranston, and so Knightsville in Cranston is where you can have a really good Italian meal.
This is the kind of insight we can't Google. I got time for one more. And pardon me if this is a broader question than you're looking for, but what is the most difficult part of this? There's a lot of things that seem difficult in being a federal legislator. What do you find the most challenging?
I mean, look, it is a hyper-partisan environment where it's hard to get things done, you know, that makes it challenging. I think especially in this Trump 2 era, where they are trying to win elections not by presenting the best ideas to the American people, but through partisan gerrymandering and grandstanding and, you know, trying to influence the media. It creates a very toxic environment here. But that being said, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, do my best to represent my constituents, fight hard for the things that they care about, and you know, do my part to preserve our democracy.
Can you believe it's less than 6 months till Election Day? Has this gone fast or slow for you?
It's you know, it's been busy. I'll say that. But I'm looking forward to November.
Right. Seth Magaziner, Democrat from Rhode Island. Appreciate your joining us. Still to come at 5:35. Everything from War and Peace to UFOs. Stay with us. Back in just a moment.
America leads the world in medicine development.
It matters.
We get new medicines first, nearly 3 years faster.
5 million Americans go to work because we make medicines here at home.
And not relying on other countries keeps us safe. But China is racing to overtake us.
Will we let them?
Or will we choose to stay ahead?
When America leads,
America cures.
Let's tell Washington to keep us in the lead.
There are moments that shape an organization's future. A policy shift, a crisis or investigation, a market shock. When that moment hits, the clock starts. Markets move in minutes. Regulators, employees, and customers respond instantly. Narrative helps leaders respond with pace, engage stakeholders with precision, and position brands with perspective. So when challenges emerge, you can navigate complexity and lead with clarity before the narrative is defined for you.
We are Lions International, one association of global volunteers, one foundation for humanitarian grants, shaping the future, one act of kindness at a time. We are on a mission to improve health and well-being, to strengthen communities, to serve a world in need. We are Lions International.
To learn more, visit lionsclubs.org.
Yes. Welcome back to 535. I'm Marianna Sotomayor, congressional correspondent at Puck News. We all know that President Trump is currently in China. He's trying to negotiate, make some deals, potentially on trade, as he's already talked about, with President Xi Jinping. But there are many lawmakers here who are trying to put restrictions on China. One of them is joining me now, most notably Congressman John Moolenaar, Republican from Michigan, who is, of course, the chairman of the Select Committee on China. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I want to talk to you about one of these bills, the current one that you and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, also Michigander,
Yes.
Democrat,
Yes.
bipartisan bill. We really like that on this show.
Yeah.
Is putting restrictions, more restrictions, I should say, on Chinese EVs. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the reality is that Chinese EVs are rolling data collection devices, and we've seen this where more information is collected. China is a surveillance state, so they monitor all this, they hack into our infrastructure, and they're a national security risk. That also, in addition to some of the unfair trade practices we've seen in the area of manufacturing, where it puts our workers at a disadvantage because of their subsidies along their supply chain and making it lower cost. Sometimes they use slave labor. Sometimes they partner with the Chinese military for dual use capabilities. So there are multiple reasons why we want to make sure that Chinese vehicles are not accessing information about the United States.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. You can't really buy Chinese-made vehicles, but there are even American brands and I believe European brands who do buy parts from China. So that's
Yes.
where this concern also lies. Away from the EVs, it's also it's more about the parts that are still coming in here that could pose a national security risk.
I think we should be concerned about batteries. We should be concerned about various technologies, and we've seen that their unfair trade practices have really hollowed out American industries. You know, you think about drones that are used for all sorts of things in agriculture and law enforcement. I mean, 80% of the drones were being made by DJI, a drone manufacturer in China, that also has a capability of sharing that information, phoning home, if you will. And we just need to be aware of very different values that China has in terms of human dignity, human rights, the freedoms, and make sure we aren't allowing them to leverage that against the United States.
So an interesting development over the past year, China and Canada have partnered up. I believe Canada is now going to sell a number of Chinese EVs. I mean, you live in Michigan, right on the border with Canada.
Right.
What's to say that, you know, a Canadian that just wants to take a weekend trip over to Michigan doesn't cross over with their EVs? I mean, does that also pose a national security threat to us?
I think anytime you have connected vehicles and technology with computer technology, you have to remember that China is hacking our infrastructure all the time. And, you know, it puts our civilian infrastructure at risk. It also puts, you know, military capabilities at risk. And so anytime you have them, whether it's routers, whether it's EVs with access to the internet, drones, even cranes. We found that they've used cranes in our ports where they'll attach a cellular modem that can monitor what's going in and out of the port and can share that information back with the Chinese Communist Party. So we need to be very careful on this, very strategic, and recognize we're dealing with an adversary who's very capable technologically, militarily, and has very different values of human dignity.
You've introduced this bill quite recently. Is it a coincidence? Should we read into the fact that, this has been introduced while the president is in China talking about trade?
Well, it really builds on, the Trump administration's efforts in this area, as well as the Biden administration's efforts. There's a recognition, China is advancing technologically, and then, it's a surveillance society. So they're aware of everything that's going on with their citizenry, and we have certain freedoms and protections in the United States we want to keep. And so that's really the reason why we introduced this legislation. But we also wanted to make a clear case that we want to see fair trade with China, and what they've done over the years is hollowed out industries through unfair trade practices, and we need to be strategic about that. In Europe right now, they're losing their automotive industry because of these Chinese vehicles being dumped through overcapacity. It also has military implications because so much of our military industrial base depends on capabilities in manufacturing that also support the auto industry. So if the auto industry is gone, it also reduces our military industrial base.
So one thing we like to ask is obviously, can a bill like this become law? Like, are you talking with the White House, keeping them informed, not just on this, you're obviously on the Select Committee on China, there's a number of issues and a number of bills that have been proposed. Is that something that you think you could get done this Congress?
Well, in Congress, as you know, there's the Senate and there's the House. The Senate, and I want to compliment Senator Marino, who first called me about this legislation and has introduced this along with Senator Slotkin in the Senate. Representative Dingell and I have introduced this in the House. We're going to work with the White House, get as much technical feedback to improve the bill so that it's workable and builds on what they're already working on in this arena. And it could go through either as a standalone bill or part of an overall package of legislation that goes through.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you as well, since the president is right now in China. I know earlier this year at the Detroit Economic Club, he did say about Chinese car makers, quote, if they want to come in and build a plant and hire you and hire your friends and your neighbors, that's great. I love that. Do you agree with that? He's going in there. He's talked about even yesterday, he wants to open trade talks with China. There's obviously been a lot of things that have changed in the past year on that front.
Yeah.
But I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, and I think, the Commerce Secretary Letnick has been very clear about that not happening, and so I think as the president's comments were further clarified, there is going to be a debate on, if Chinese companies, invest to a certain degree in American companies, what level would that be allowed? You don't want to give up control. You want to make sure we're protecting trade secrets. But that'll be a debate that's ongoing and has been for many years.
Yeah. Do you think that there could be a moment of opportunity that could allow these Chinese EVs to come in? Or you're monitoring that closely,
well,
I assume.
I'm hoping that we can lock this down legislatively and make sure we save the auto industry, protect it, not from fair competition, but unfair competition that has national security implications.
Yeah. In the same realm of talking about EVs, obviously a lot of people are talking about oil and gas prices. I've even heard, whether it's from friends or even up here on the Hill, people saying, man, those people who have EVs now, they might get a little lucky as these gas prices are going up higher and higher. I'm curious, what are you telling your constituents? Maybe you heard that kind of feedback back home. What should I be doing? What's your advice?
Yeah, well, my advice is we know that gas prices will come down. We're in the midst of a conflict with a country that we cannot allow to become a nuclear power, that is threatening our interests and the largest state sponsor of terrorism, that's building weaponry that could reach our shores. So we're in the midst of a conflict, but ultimately this will get resolved. Gas prices will come down. That's my message, but I recognize that it is creating uncertainty and also a burden. But I think the American people realize they don't want to see a nuclear Iran. We've seen what Iran does around the world, and we want to make sure they are neutralized every way possible, and hopefully they'll have a better future if they have more freedom in Iran.
Do you think that there still should be American-made EVs here in the U.S.? So at least it's my understanding that in the past, when President Biden was in office, obviously we saw a push for more EVs, clean energy, et cetera. Republicans were very critical, saying, hey, don't impose these kind of policies or these kind of choices on people. Do you think that that should still be acceptable?
I think my message has always been that customers should have choices, and they shouldn't be mandated by the federal government, and the car companies should be able to make the products that their customers want. And so what I was critical with the Biden administration is they were mandating certain technologies that could only be met, and it forced customers to pay more government subsidies. And to me, I think the market ought to decide these things, and people should have the freedom to choose whether it's an EV, a hybrid, or a traditional vehicle.
I wanted to ask you quickly too on the gas tax. That's an idea that's been floated. I believe both John Thune and Mike Johnson have kind of thrown cold water on the idea coming from the White House. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that could really help alleviate the cost
I
of
think
fueling?
everybody's concerned of what can we do to lower gas prices, and certainly that's an idea that can be debated, in
Sure. Ways
and Means and will be. But I think at the end of the day, we want the fundamentals. We're doing more energy development in the country, and that's going to help for multiple reasons. We want to speed up the permitting. So there are things we can do that will have some longer term benefits, and as we get through this conflict with Iran, I think these fundamentals will actually make energy much more affordable and help us be more competitive in this area.
Before I let you go, obviously you're examining so many different fronts on your committee, the Select Committee on China. What should we expect from you all, whether it's more bills, bipartisan negotiations, hearings in the next couple of weeks before? I mean, November's going to be here before we know it.
Well, one thing we have in the works is looking at these scam centers that are happening around the world and stealing billions of dollars, and how those have been supported, enabled by the Chinese Communist Party, and how that as an economy is spreading around Asia, and the corruption that is occurring, and the number of people who are being preyed upon in the United States. So we're going to highlight that, make sure our constituents are aware of those threats and how these online scams take place, but also to kind of tie a nexus to what China is doing by enabling that.
Yeah. Are you pushing, in case the majority flips, are you pushing for the Select Committee to stay in place? It seems like there's bipartisan will for that.
I think this has been one of the hallmarks of Congress and the House, where we've worked in a bipartisan way, looked to see how can we win this competition for the American people. And my hope is that we'd continue. We're able to focus very clearly on these issues, and then we're a force multiplier for other committees.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us in our inaugural week of 535.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back with more interviews.
America's Vet Dogs is a national nonprofit empowering veterans, first responders, and active duty service members facing both visible and hidden disabilities through the placement of a highly trained service dog. However, recipients never bear the financial burden. You can be a part of making a meaningful difference in the lives of veterans and first responders in need. Learn more by visiting vetdogs.org.
I work hard. My dad worked hard. That's where I got it from. What I take home is my future and my kids' future. And if I can invest in companies, they're going to reflect my principles, what I believe in. So why would those companies hire outside people to tell them to embrace principles I don't believe in. Congress must protect the financial future of Americans from the foreign-owned duopoly that answers to no one.
Welcome back. I'm Susan Davis. This is 535, and I'm joined now by Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So you've reintroduced something called the Housing First Act. It has more than a dozen of your Democratic colleagues on board as co-sponsors. Talk about the problem you're trying to solve with this bill.
Yeah, well, you know, there are so many adults that have experienced housing discrimination after they have paid their debt to society. They're looking to successfully reintegrate back into society, reunite with their families, make a positive contribution. And this legislation aims to acknowledge that which is foundational to their success. Housing first. Before you can pursue education, before you can pursue employment, you need housing first. Something like 30% of people in my district that are being released from correctional facilities are being released to homeless shelters. So that is really not setting them up to make the best contribution and really contributing in many ways to cycles of recidivism. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, public health is public safety. Housing is a human right. It is essential to the health of the individual and the broader ecosystem. And as I said, it supports family reunification, breaking cycles of recidivism, and making it possible for people to make a contribution. So what this legislation aims to do is to regulate the information that credit reporting agencies, there's legislation, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This would amend the Fair Credit Reporting Act to regulate the information that is shared with landlords when it comes to tenant screenings. Because 1 in 3 adults in this country have experienced discrimination by a landlord.
I just want to pause you there for a second, because that statistic to me is so striking. And when I was doing research about this legislation, in your press release, it said this would 70 million Americans have some form of criminal conviction. And I thought, that can't be right. And I Googled.
No,
and
it's accurate. Formerly
incarcerated
people is a large constituency. And, you know, you're talking about, you know, someone who perhaps has a juvenile conviction.
Sure.
Or, again, they've already paid their debt to society and it's, you know, more than 7 years old. I mean, why should these things be a part of a tenant screening, standing in the way of someone being able to secure housing? Which is essential to the stability of their life and their contribution. And let me also just say, in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, 1 in 4 children have an incarcerated parent.
Wow.
And although I was not raised, you know, in my district, I'm one of those children. My father was incarcerated in and out of the criminal legal system, mostly because his substance abuse disorder was something that was criminalized. But my father was always brilliant, and while he was incarcerated, he attained 2 advanced degrees, came out, earned a PhD, became a dean at a college, a published author. And there are so many people that are clamoring or hungering to make a positive contribution after they've served their time, paid their debt, and their ability to access housing. There are so many barriers. We need to reduce those barriers so that they can be stable and they can go on to make incredible contributions like my father has.
How does it amend the Fair Credit Reporting Act? Does it essentially block landlords from knowing this information, or does it limit?
It regulates what information they're able to access.
And can you be more specific about that? Because I would think, in some regards, you could hear an argument from people that say, hey, if somebody has a violent criminal record, should a landlord have a right to know that information if they're looking out for their broader community?
I think it's important to recognize, you know, that if someone has been incarcerated, then there's already been a judicial process. So whatever their crimes were, they served the time for those crimes. They've paid their debt to society. And if we're doing what we're supposed to be, which is supporting people while they're incarcerated in their rehab, in their reform of self, in their ability to bring to bear whatever their contribution should be, then they're better positioned when they come out, and they need to have the stability of housing first. You can't say you want to break cycles of recidivism. You can't say that you want to have a healthy society and then make it impossible for people to, because of discrimination in employment, to earn a job, because of discrimination in housing, to secure permanent housing. how then do you stop people from in any way contributing to the holistic health, of our community? So again, public health is public safety. Housing is a human right. It is a determinant of health. It determines social and economic mobility. That's true for everyone, but it certainly is true for those that are looking to, upon release, make a positive contribution. I just think it's disingenuous to say that you don't want people to commit crime, you don't want them to return to prison. I mean, you want them to make good, to do good. But how can people do that if they can't survive?
Yeah, although I think it does seem fair to say that there's a huge distinction in crimes, right? Like a personal drug conviction versus something that involves violence. It does seem like the caliber of crime does matter here. And is there any right to know if you are someone who wants to give your property or turn over control of your property to someone that you might have concerns about?
Let me just say this, though. It's just like with the movements in the past around banning the box because of people that were experiencing discrimination for having criminal records. There is still an option for people to disclose, and more often than not, people do that because that is a part of their story. But the point is
self-disclosure.
Yeah, self-disclosure. So that's still, But at the end of the day, when the courts have ruled someone has a conviction, they serve their time for that conviction, they should be afforded the opportunity to rehabilitate. Who they are in society and to make a positive contribution. I would hate if my father, who cycled in and out of the criminal legal system for many decades, either as a juvenile or as an adult, and again, most of that was driven by addiction, for my father to be judged for the rest of his life by his worst mistakes and days. My father is a brilliant man. He's a good man. He's a decent man. He made mistakes. He made mistakes while he was battling a disease. And there are so many people for whom this is true. There's an addiction crisis, a fentanyl crisis, an opioid crisis, in this country. And many people commit crimes to support addiction. So when you ask the question, you couldn't believe how many people are formerly incarcerated. That drives a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so we have to disrupt this prison to homelessness pipeline as well, because we do see homelessness as something, particularly under this administration, that's being criminalized.
I'm curious about that too, because you talk about recidivism, and clearly housing is a component of that, but addiction also seems to be a component, mental health. How big of a piece of the puzzle do you see the housing element of preventing recidivism?
Oh, it's everything. I mean, how can people access mental and behavioral health services? How can they pursue employment, gainful employment? How can they pursue education? Housing is not just shelter. Housing is stability. It's some sense of permanence. It's a home. It's a safe place. And I think it's important to note this, since I said in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, 1 in 4 children have an incarcerated parent. This is not just about that individual, right? So people like to think that people that are formerly incarcerated are just independent, entities. No, they're individuals that are connected to families, that are connected to communities. And in order for them to successfully re-enter into society, and again, to break cycles of recidivism and to make a positive contribution, a big part of that is family reunification. So this is also about supporting those adults, those parents, in reuniting with their children that might be in kinship care or perhaps in the foster system. And then finally, I would say we already have a number of policies on the books, particularly in public housing, where if you're formerly incarcerated and you go to reunite with your family, and if they reside in public housing, they cannot welcome you home. You cannot reunite with your grandmother, with your wife, with your children, because whoever is on that lease risks eviction because you have a prior conviction. So there are a number of policies already in place that discourage family reunification and that contribute to to those barriers in access and housing for people that are formerly incarcerated.
I think it's fair to say that this is a constituency that doesn't often have a lot of champions, particularly in elected officials. And this is one of those issues that you can hear the attack ad, right? Like you can hear an attack ad saying, working families can't afford to make the rent, and Ayanna Pressley wants to make it easier for criminals to move next door, right? Like you can just hear how someone could weaponize this issue. How do you explain this to people that might be skeptical or suggest that maybe these are not the right populations to be prioritizing right now?
I would just say a lot of this is a bill reintroduction. It is a bill that is responsive to a problem that many of my constituents were facing. I seek to advance legislative solutions that are responsive to what I hear in community. So this is not some, just a personal mission, though I understand, given my own personal lived experience, how it can be impactful and beneficial. This is something that I've heard from families in my district who have experienced discrimination, which, by the way, is illegal. I would also say that people often have a narrow definition of who is a criminal. So if we recognize the addiction crisis in this country, many of us have criminals in our own families who have been in a prison, been in a jail, been incarcerated. That's why that constituency is so large. They could have gone on a joyride as a teenager, and now they have a record that's following them for the rest of their lives. So I don't want to create a hierarchy here, so to speak. I'm just saying that increasingly so the definition of criminal continues to broaden, because to even be homeless right now, to be unhoused, is to be a criminal.
I also want to talk to you about something you did this week. There was a field hearing in Palm Beach, and you heard from women who are survivors of abuse from convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. I'm curious why you think it's important for Congress specifically to hear from these women, and what you want the public to take away from that hearing.
Well, I've been, on the Committee on Oversight since I was elected to Congress in the 116th Congress. So I've been in Congress now for 8 years. I've served on that committee the entire time. And what guides me in that work are the words of Elijah Cummings, the great Elijah Cummings, our chair at the time, may he rest in peace, who said that the mandate of this committee is to be an efficient and effective pursuit of the truth. And that's why this matters, because the truth has been evaded, it has been obstructed. We certainly have not moved with efficiency. There has been obstructions, there have been delays. There's been a denial of this truth. These survivors have had their character assassinated, on top of having their bodies violated, on top of having their rights violated. In the Crime Victims' Rights Act, their very rights were violated in that regard. So, we see grown women before us, so people could forget that these were children, girls, 14, 15, 17 years old, who had aspirations to be dancers, artists, models, doctors, lawyers, and their dreams have been destroyed, their bodies were violated, their innocence corrupted. This has been a lifetime sentence for them. And I've spent a lot of time with them, but I'm not new to survivors' justice work. I've long been doing the work to combat human trafficking and to support survivors of sexual assault. So I've been doing survivors' justice work a long time. This hearing was important because it was survivor-centered. I think some people think of the Epstein files as and something abstract. These aren't static documents that live on a shelf that we're just demanding be released. The Epstein files are the survivors. They are real people who have been subjected to a lifetime sentence of trauma and also economic hardship. None of them signed up for legal fees for 20 years. Many of them talked about because their names have been unredacted. So it's been insult to injury. They were already harmed. Then there was an institutional betrayal by law enforcement, the Department of Justice, and by government, shielding the powerful and the privileged who participated in this pedophile, predator, Ponzi scheme. Just vile. And then it's insult to injury to be denied accountability, to be denied transparency, to be denied justice, then to have your name. Many of them shared stories about how some of their partners did not even know. And their children were unaware. And so for the powerful and the privileged to be protected in these files and for their names to be redacted, and the names of these children to be unredacted, who are now adults, but who have struggled to live full lives. This has become their whole life, is justice and accountability here for those that have come forward. And many more have not, but they told stories about how can I get a job? Because every employer is just going to Google you, and they don't want to be associated.
Do you see any restitution for these women, particularly those, as you referenced, whose names were wrongfully publicly released in the documents that should have been redacted, and there's no takebacks on that?
Well, what I can tell you is that the survivors of the vile acts committed by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their co-conspirators, the survivors deserve more than sympathy. And I'm actually working very closely with a number of them on a legislative response to address the ways in which their rights were violated through the Crime Victims' Rights Act. The law was not followed there, so we're working through now. I mean, there's no compensation that could ever be enough, but they do deserve restorative justice because, again, they are still, believe it or not, they're burdened by immense shame, and this is not their shame to carry. Trauma, it just follows them and manifests in different ways in their life. Many of them talked about never having children because they feared they wouldn't be able to keep them safe. Some of them are mothers and they don't allow their daughter to go out of their sight, not even to be with family members alone. You know, so this changes you on a very foundational, fundamental level. How you see the world, how you see yourself in the world. Again, their innocence was corrupted, their dreams were destroyed, their bodies were violated, as were their rights. So we're going to keep pushing because, to me, yes, this is about the Epstein survivors. This is about transparency. It's about accountability. It's about some semblance of justice. Real justice would mean they would never have been harmed in the first place, but they're a proxy for all survivors. Yeah. You know, I'd like to think that we're establishing a new blueprint. But in the same way that we cared about the systemic harms within the Catholic Church or the systemic harms within Boy Scouts of America, we need to know who all these monsters are. In the words of Virginia Giuffre, may she rest in peace, who took her life after decades of fighting for justice. We need to know who all the monsters are. They need to be named and shamed because they could still be committing these crimes.
I also want to ask you about redistricting. It's been a couple weeks since the Supreme Court decision that rolled back key elements of the Voting Rights Act. Tell you things you already know. This could have dramatic implications for black representation in Congress, particularly in the South. Can you talk about what that conversation is like specifically within the CBC? And do you see any responses or strategies forming around it?
Well, whatever those strategies are, I wouldn't be broadcasting them on television. You know, I will just say that I've spoken often about the anti-immigrant, the xenophobic policies of this administration, the anti-worker policies that I consider to be anti-freedom. They're also anti-black. They have trafficked in anti-blackness from the very beginning. I mean, Donald Trump has a long track record discriminating against black tenants when he was a landlord, calling for ostensibly the lynching of the Central Five, the Central Park, the Exonerated Five, what we know today now is the Exonerated Five, calling for the lynching, being judge, jury, and executioner, you know, in the public realm before they had even had a day in court, attacking black women journalists in the White House, weaponizing his Department of Justice against everyone from Tish James to LaMonica McIver to Lisa Cook, and I could go on. So it is not surprising that now Donald Trump and his co-accomplice in the Supreme Court, because the court is incredibly imbalanced, and they have been, I think, co-conspirators and accomplices in advancing this authoritarianism. Again, it's an anti-freedom agenda. People that want to control the books you read, the very autonomy of what you do with your body, that want to degrade free speech, and now also want to deny your access to the ballot box. That is an anti-freedom agenda. And yes, this is a unique burden for Black America, who for decades, even after the Voting Rights Act was passed, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed, have been outworking and outvoting voter suppression. But it is very clear that this administration is working actively to take us back, not even just to Jim Crow, I would say even pre-Reconstruction, to take us all the way back, seeking to silence and disenfranchise the voices and the votes, and to try to dilute the power and the Black representation of Black America. So he has been attacking black people, black bodies, black votes, black power, black progress. And although it is a burden that black America, black voters, the black workers carry, I mean, we have a crisis with black women. Unemployment is at 7%. They've been pushed out of the federal workforce, you know? So everywhere you look at it, it's just a tsunami of hurt. Black folks are at the center of that, but this needs to be a problem and an issue of concern for people of conscience. Everyone should be linking arms in solidarity. And we need to, as quickly as possible, advance a vote on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and have a legislative response to this attack on majority black districts and our representation. So in many ways we've been readying, you know, for this. We're always going to have contingency plans, working with, you know, a number of organizations and entities, but all roads lead to the South. And I would not have anyone believe that this is a problem that can be contained or a fight that should be limited to who takes this on, because this is about our democracy collectively. This is about fairness. This is about representation, something that everyone is owed. And even though they are trying to, they're very good at the shuffle game, the Jedi mind trick, they want to convince you that this is about partisan gerrymandering, but this is very racially motivated. They are livid that black people, marginalized communities, we're the supermajority, and they don't like that.
Can I posit one thing to you? Pat Ryan, your Democratic colleague, spoke about this to us, and he said, which I thought was really interesting, that he felt in his district, in the Hudson Valley of New York, not a Southern black district, that the response to this decision was akin to the Dobbs decision, that he was hearing it from people who were, he thought it was going to be incredibly animating, and that pastors in his district said that they're going to organize around it. Does that feel right to you? Are you feeling that way, that this is for a lot of voters akin to the Dobbs decision in terms of motivating you to turn out in 2026?
Well, I mean, there have been so many consequential decisions, you know, out of the Supreme Court, clearly, you know, throughout history. The gravity is great. It is a devastating blow to democracy. And you know, as to whether or not it's motivating, I think it's more than about motivating people to the ballot box. It should be motivating people to understand, to sharpen their clarity about my Republican colleagues, again, in this anti-freedom agenda, working to advance things like the SAVE Act. I mean, they are looking to disenfranchise the voices and the votes of millions. So this particular fight is about Black America, but the same is true for women. And that should be of concern to everyone. So I am in many spaces, faith-based spaces, community spaces, political spaces, apolitical spaces. This has the attention of many. People are motivated, and they're also afraid. They're afraid about just how low are they willing to take things? How far back are they really willing to take us? But for me personally, look, I don't have the luxury of apathy or cynicism. People are depending on me to stand in the gap. And so I'm just focused on how do I do what my forefathers and mothers did before me, everyone from Bob Moses to Fannie Lou Hamer, and that is to leverage every tool available. I'm going to agitate, I'm going to litigate, I'm going to legislate, I'm going to organize, I'm going to mobilize, I'm going to fight, you know, because we can't go quietly into the night here. This is deeply consequential, devastating, deeply worrisome, and again, predictable, given a backlash of an emboldened white supremacy, which is really what this is.
Congresswoman Pressley, it's been an honor talking to you. If you would humor me, I'd love to ask you a couple of maybe more lighthearted questions in a segment that we call 1 minute.
I like lighthearted.
Couple lightning rounds about Congress.
I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business.
I ask unanimous consent. I ask unanimous consent.
The senator from Nebraska is recognized.
The gentlelady is recognized.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
What's the best committee assignment?
I'm very spoiled. I've been on financial services and oversight, and I love them both. So I'm biased. I have incredible rankers, and we were in the majority. They were great chairs. Listen, I love the work of oversight. I have to say that. It's
a fun one to be on.
I really do love the work of
do a lot
oversight.
on that one.
Yeah, I love the work of oversight.
I'm kind of curious to ask you this, just because you had very pointed comments about Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Do you have a favorite person on the other side of the aisle?
You know, I don't know if you've been following, but we did just advance this discharge petition for Haiti TPS to extend it by 3 years, which was a huge undertaking. And ultimately that passed with 224 votes. And so a number of Republicans voted in support of that, and one independent. And so one that I will name is Mike Lawler. I really appreciate his responsiveness and recognizing that he represents a number of incredible Haitian neighbors and people making incredible contributions in healthcare, hospitality, construction, to workforce, civic life in our economy. And I think at the end of the day, like, none of these issues should really be partisan. You should just be making a decision as a person of conscience about what is in the best interest. So I think in that instance, he did that. Yeah. So I appreciate Mike Lawler.
And finally, what is your favorite phrase that is uttered nowhere else but on Capitol Hill?
Oh my gosh, that's a hard one. I'm trying to think about our various, chat groups. what might be something in there? I don't know. I curse like a sailor, so I'm struggling to come up with something clean.
No, well, I will tell you, Josh Gottheimer said something dirty.
Okay, so I don't know what is something that would be unique to the Hill. But I will say this, I've been in Congress for 8 years. Prior to that, I was an aide for 16, 4 in the House, 11 in the Senate. I have tremendous respect for this institution and this place. For everyone that raises their hand and takes an oath, and despite what people think, there is community here. There is occasionally even camaraderie and sometimes collegiality. Not enough of it. It's certainly something we need to, I served in, I was an aide when John Kerry, that's who I worked for 11 years, was best friends with John McCain. Yeah. So I look forward to a day where we can get back to that, but in the here and now, for me, the goal is not bipartisanship, because increasingly I don't have a party to do bipartisan work with. I have people that are complicit in wholesale harm, but I will sit at the table and work with anyone who is serious about centering the people who sent us here in doing that work in earnest on their behalf. It's a great honor to be a member of Congress. I know what the polls say. I know what our popularity is, but I will tell you it is a great honor, and I love being a Congresswoman, and I'm going to keep working and fighting every day.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We need to take a very quick break, but we will be right back.
He is what your show is called, The Decider.
It's Washington's hottest new show, and it has the Beltway buzzing.
Americans, they know BS when they see BS.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Brody Mullins.
Is this era ending and is a new era beginning?
And veteran strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller.
Have you ever had to tell a client no?
Talk to the biggest and most influential players.
We wanted $1 million. He said done.
Rewriting the rules of influence.
Business is going to be on the ballot.
Congress needs to do their job.
They become lapdogs rather than watchdogs.
The people who never talk.
That's such a good question.
Talk to them.
It was kind of fun, actually.
It's Washington's only show by and for insiders.
Welcome to the Deciders.
Watch weekly right here on 535.
You're watching 535.
This is 535.
535.
You're watching 535.
535. 535.
535.
We're live on Capitol Hill, and 535 starts right now.
Welcome back to the 535. I'm Brody Mullins. Today we have Mike Efaw, the National Legislative Director of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Brody.
So tell us about your union. More than 100 years old, 10,000 members. Who do you represent and what do you do?
Yeah, that's the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen was founded in 1901. It's our 125th year. We have a convention this year, and it's going to be a big celebration over that. So our members, we install, maintain, repair, and take care of the railroad signal systems that keep the trains on the right track and keep them from running into one another. We take care of the grade crossings, and I like to use a phrase that Congressman Ruley told me. Grade crossings are where trains meet towns. And we take care of those systems as well as safety devices such as everybody's familiar with hotbox detectors after the East Palestine train derailment. So that's a big safety.
So you're sort of the human protectors of rail safety out there for cargo and freight.
Indeed. We take care of all of the safety items, and we make sure that the trains run safely and efficiently.
Right. So let's talk about a couple of big regulatory issues that are going on right now that are affecting you guys.
Yes.
We'll start with the rail merger, $85 billion merger between UP, Union Pacific, and Norfolk Southern.
Yes.
Lots of companies for this merger, lots of companies against this merger. Where are you guys?
Okay, where the BRS stands, we think that this is just a terrible, terrible decision or potential merger, and there are many issues, but the four big ones for us are safety, competition, service, and accountability. We think all of those will suffer in a merger of this size. We have seen mergers in the past, and it has definitely affected those four areas.
Now, for those who are not following, this is an $85 billion merger between two of the four biggest railroads in the country. An application was submitted last year, not accepted for sort of bureaucratic reasons. The application was resubmitted April 30th, and now we're in another review period. How do you get your voice and your message out into that process? Is it talking to Congress? Is it talking to the administration?
A little bit of both. Plus, we joined a coalition, Stop the Rail Merger Coalition, and it has been a great voice, and they have really put our concerns forward, and we're proud to be in that coalition. And I think we are making some good headway on letting members of Congress and beyond know the potential consequences of making a single transcontinental railroad that would be so powerful. It would be detrimental and probably promulgate more mergers in the future.
So it's sort of amazing. So far, the Trump administration, as Republicans, have allowed a lot more mergers than we sort of thought so far. There was a big merger earlier this year last year with Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Juniper Networks in the tech space. This seems to be the merger that's getting the most pushback from companies, from rail consumers, which is the chemical manufacturers, the Farm Bureau, and now you guys. So how would this merger make things less safe for rails?
Well, number one, it would dominate the industry. It would be so large that the other railroads would be kind of squeezed out of a lot of issues. And when you get one railroad with that much power, they're going to really have their own way to do what they want, and they're worried about getting their freight from point A to point B, and that is it. And
so for my entire life and for the last 100 years, the Democratic Party and labor unions have sort of been working hand in hand.
Yes.
But you just hired a Republican firm, CGCN, to try to advocate for you in Washington. Why is that? Why cross the aisle?
The BRS decided to partner with CGCN because this is a very critical time for rail in our country with the proposed merger. With the surface transportation reauthorization coming up, and regulators are looking at rolling back regulations on signal systems, on highway grade crossings, like I said, where trains meet towns, and other safety devices that really are the backbone of rail safety. So that is going to be one of the main issues we believe that really suffer. And CGCN is that partner that we think can get our message out and tell all of the important lawmakers. And that's how we're going to get noticed, because when we did our homework, CGCN came up, and they seem to be the best group to partner with.
Interesting. There are lots of other issues going on here. You mentioned the surface transportation bill, which could be marked up next week. This is a $500 billion bill.
Yes. There's
a push to include this J.D. Vance railroad safety regulation. Where do you see that playing out? Where do you stand?
I am worried at the way they have gone about this bill. We have been kept in the dark on any legislative text. So without knowing what's in it, we don't know if we're going to be able to be for it or against it. And with a markup coming so soon, I don't know where we're going to stand on that. So it could be watered down stuff. I don't understand why they would take the vice president, when he was then senator of Ohio. It was his bill. Why would you mess with his bill when it was a good bill to begin with?
Well, that's another way of describing how interesting things are these days. We've got the vice president, a Republican, teaming up with unions, trying to push railroad safety regulations against the railroad industry and the rest of the Republican Party. I mean, the normal political alliances have really been scrambled in D.C.
You know, that's a great question. And this administration has been great on rail safety. There's nothing that they have done in the rail space that has concerned the BRS because they are for rail safety. They have voiced it. It is on record, this administration. Plus, we have had some other issues up in Long Island. We are having issues up there, and the administration seems to be having our back. We had a presidential emergency board, which all of the arbitrators were picked by the administration, the president himself, and they ruled our way. So this administration's been pretty good for us when it comes to rail issues.
Fascinating. Do you think you'd ever hear yourself say that this Republican administration has been good for unions?
Actually, I did not think I would ever say that.
Mike Efaw, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll be back after the break with Ben Brubeck, continue to talk about union and Republican issues. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brody.
Congressman Moolenaar, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Appreciate you having me.
Can you explain to people where your district is and what kind of district it is? What do they grow in your district? And is that a big job industry in your district? Talk to me about this bill you have. It's called the Farms Act. What exactly is the problem you're trying to solve with this? Is this something that the administration could address on their own, or does it need to require Congress to pass a law to really fix it? Is this bipartisan at all? Do you have Democratic support? So what's the brass tacks here? Who's your counterpart in the Senate, and what is the path forward you see for this legislation?
Oh my gosh. You know, let me think about that.
Welcome back to the 535. I'm Brody Mullins. Today we have Ben Brubeck. I want to continue our conversation on the Republican Party, labor unions, and how the normal affiliations have been scrambled recently. Ben is a longtime Republican lobbyist with Government Affairs Solutions. You've been working in the labor union space and employment law for more than 2 decades. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the program. Congratulations on the program.
Thanks a lot. So tell us about sort of the evolution, or how did the long-time alliance between the Democratic Party and labor unions start to sort of unravel a little bit?
Yeah, well, I was in Washington, came here back in 2003. You know, the labor unions and Democrats were kind of working hand in glove together on everything. And you know, there were some Republicans who were supportive of the labor union agenda, especially the construction trade unions, the blue collar workers. Not really talking about government unions. But what we saw kind of over the last 2 decades is some Republicans being more vocal about it, being supportive of legislation, signing on to legislation. Those things were kind of no-nos and a little bit taboo back in the last 30 years. So
what changed?
Well, I think it's a little bit of where the Democrat Party has gone, to be honest with you. I think it's gone pretty far left and has alienated a lot of blue-collar voters and workers. And I think issues like NAFTA and trade and where we are with infrastructure to some degree, I think that's alienated a lot. And Republicans, some of them were really trying to bring more of these blue-collar voters into the party, which include union voters. And in America, in the construction industry, which is where I've done a lot of my work, less than 10% of the construction workforce is unionized. So they've been trying to figure out a way to bring those folks in to some degree, but it's only been a handful of those Republicans. Hasn't been the overall majority.
So, I spent 20 years with the Wall Street Journal covering union issues and corporate issues, and the last major bill I remember covering that unions had a chance on was the card check bill, which I looked up last night, was 2007.
Yeah.
19 years ago was the last time, in my mind, that unions had a big legislative program. Now that lost. But now they're making a comeback, right, with a couple of these new pieces of legislation. Let's talk about the PRO Act.
Yeah, that bill you're talking about is called the Employee Free Choice Act, right? And so that failed when Democrats had full control of the White House and both chambers of Congress. And then the new bill, the PRO Act, is sort of another iteration of that. And basically what that tries to do is undermine state right to work laws and get rid of independent contractor status, strip workers of the right to a secret ballot, all those types of things that were in the Employee Free Choice Act but have kind of softened a little bit and trying to go back at it. So the unions are pretty frustrated because they haven't been able to get that over the agenda, over the finish line. And so what they've been doing is they've been looking for regulatory activity through the White House, through the National Labor Relations Board, and through some one-off pieces of legislation to get their priorities over the finish line. And so there's been a bill recently that people have been talking about, the Faster Labor Contracts Act, which is a sort of piece of the broader PRO Act that's been broadly defeated. And that bill would force both unions and businesses into binding arbitration with a third-party federal arbiter if there was no way to get to a contract within 150 days. And so that's really not great. That's a lose-lose for both small businesses and for the unions because they're getting terms that may not make sense for both parties. But it's a way to try to make unionization a lot easier.
So let's get deeper into that one in a second, but let's go back. So for 20 years, unions have not been able to make progress legislatively on the Hill. The PRO Act didn't work in the Biden administration. And then you're saying unions are therefore going to the administration trying to work things administratively. That would normally be the playbook if Democrats were in charge. But here we have Trump as a Republican, Trump nominating the NLRB chair. And have they made progress with the Trump administration working through the administration?
Yeah, they've definitely made some inroads with the Trump administration, which is a bit odd because the building trades unions, especially the ones that I've been working with and against in some instances, have spent basically 3 cycles trying to make sure that President Trump doesn't get elected and also pretty much opposing every Republican up and down the ballot and spent hundreds of millions of dollars in that space. But they've gone to the White House and made this political overture that, hey, we represent blue-collar workers. We think we can help you win in swing states and make the difference in some of these tight races. And you've seen different unions try to provide political support as well as contribution to some of these unions in some of these close House districts where Republicans are running, in a very, very tight race. Yeah,
so now let's jump forward. You were talking about the Faster Labor Contracts Act. Yep. This is a provision that was sort of taken out of the PRO Act.
Right.
It's is being blocked by House Republican leadership.
Right.
But then what happened?
Yeah, so the bill is introduced by Congressman Donald Norcross from New Jersey. He's actually a union member, an IBEW member, and so he's trying to make it easier for his friends to get more membership because they've had declining membership for years. And so he offered this bill, and there were 100 co-sponsors. There were 17 Republican co-sponsors, which raised a lot of eyebrows. And now recently, Congressman Norcross has offered what they call a discharge petition to try to facilitate a floor vote and bypass the normal committee structure and votes.
And so how many votes do they need?
They need 218. That's the magic number to get a discharge petition over the finish line. And right now they have, I think, 209 folks, wow, which is a lot. And there are 2 Republicans that have actually signed on to.
And that's Mike Lawler?
Mike Lawler from New York, and then Max Miller from Ohio. He just signed on yesterday. So they're only a handful of votes away from getting this to discharge petition and a floor vote, where it's unclear how this will shake out.
So many interesting things to unpack just here. So 2 Republicans are against their leadership and for the labor priority here. But not every Democrat's on it?
Not yet. Yeah,
okay.
Not yet.
You think they will be?
I think it's possible. There might be some blue dog Democrats, which are a dying breed, that might actually not get on the bill. And I think there's been some that have concerns about just bypassing the process of having committee hearings and making sure the bill's fully vetted. I mean, those are basic blocking and tackling that the institutions here really like to have.
Okay. So what is your guess on whether this is going to get to 218?
There's a lot of stakeholders on both sides of the aisle trying to fight this. There's a group called the Coalition for a Democratic Workplace that's pushing back on this, and they've been active proponents of the PRO Act, and this represents more than 600 businesses, small and large businesses across the country. And of course, you've got the labor unions across the board that are really supportive of this, as well as the PRO Act and other things like that.
And it sort of jumps to a different issue I wanted to ask you about, which is it's easy for people to talk the talk if you're a Republican in a blue-collar district, you can talk the talk with unions. This is the first time in 20 years that their Republicans may have to actually walk the walk, and we've got two. Do you think this sort of rubber meets the road situation where these Republicans need to decide whether they're actually going to vote with unions and put up or shut up, basically?
I mean, it puts them in an uncomfortable position, right? I mean, you can talk the talk all you want, but the bigger question is, like, is this a, bad romance? Is this fatal attraction for these Republicans that do this? Are they going to draw, strong primary challenges? And are the unions actually going to support them next time there's a good candidate that comes up that's with them 100% of the time? I mean, the trade unions are having to take some choices on these issues. Do they support someone who's with them, 40, 50% of the time versus someone who could be there 100% of the time with them? So it's an interesting dynamic we're watching closely. And there's a handful of Republicans that are taking that choice to support the unions in some of these issues, and we'll see how it shakes out in the long term.
So let's go back to the president. In his last convention, he really played footsie with unions. Unions had a bigger role than ever before at his convention. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it raised a lot of eyebrows when he invited Teamsters president Sean O'Brien to get a primetime speaking spot at the convention. It was like a 15-minute slot where he was really, really attacking the Republican establishment and really, surprised a lot of people in that audience. And basically, I think there was an understanding that if Sean O'Brien got out there and got the union message to a new audience, he might get something in return. And that might be someone like Labor Secretary Lori Chavez DeReamer was a pick where it was announced when Sean O'Brien was down at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. And I think the other understanding was that the Trump administration would benefit from the Teamsters not endorsing a candidate, which they certainly have not done in the past, and they've endorsed some Republicans in the past, but recently they've endorsed Democrats up and down the board. And so this was maybe a way for both parties to benefit politically and on a big spotlight.
In the Senate, Josh Hawley has introduced the bill that would you're talking about before, the
Faster Labor Contracts
Act. Are there other Republicans in the Senate who are supporting this?
There are a handful. There are some Republicans that will generally be a little bit more supportive of the private sector blue collar workers on some issues too. So altogether in Congress, there's probably about 20, maybe 30 altogether that are you've got to watch closely on some of these labor votes.
And you've looked at the campaign finance numbers here. I mean, in my reporting, labor unions give almost 100% of their money to Democrats, maybe a little bit to Republicans. Is that changing a little bit now? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, so it seems like it's sort of like a 10% Republican to 90% Democrat contribution level. I actually pulled the data. I want to make sure I have it right. So the building trades unions, which is all the different unions that are in the construction industry, raised about $66 million last cycle and contributed about $72 million to different stakeholders. From their federal PACs, they gave $14 million altogether. 13 million went to Democrats and about 1.3 million went to Republicans. It's interesting to see what's going to happen this cycle. Will that increase? We've heard the Teamsters giving to some of these vulnerable Republicans to try to make inroads there. I don't think it's going to really be a huge total, but they're making bigger noise about this. And what's different from when I first came to Washington is some of the Republicans are excited about the donation and also the support. And that wasn't always the case. Sometimes it was kind of a quiet, oh, thank you, I'll keep this on the down low. So now it's a little bit different. The dynamics have changed a little bit.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. I mean, the fact that labor unions are supporting any Republicans at all is just mind-blowing. It shows how much is changing in Washington these days.
Yeah, and I'll just say there's so much money from the construction trade unions and the other labor unions in the system. I'm just talking about publicly disclosed money. There's a lot of dark money that's going out there from them too. Right. And we don't, that's affecting state ballot initiatives and state legislative activity. We've seen efforts during the 2010s to roll back, some of the union requirements in certain states, as well as pass right to work laws. And so they've used a lot of that dark money and this other funding, that $72 million that I talked about last cycle, to really move their legislative agenda all across the country, not just here federally.
Great. Ben Brubeck, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right back on the 535. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Made it through.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Rome. I've played many roles on TV and film, but today I want to speak to you as myself about a cause that's very dear to my heart. The Cancer Prevention and Treatment Fund provides free help to those who have cancer and those who wish to prevent it. They've also worked tirelessly on banning cancer-causing chemicals in our homes and neighborhoods. I want to thank them as a mom for protecting our families. Please donate today at the Cancer Prevention and Treatment Fund at stopcancerfund.com.
I work hard. My dad worked hard.
That's where I got it from. What I take home is my future and my kids' future. And if I can invest in companies, they're going to reflect my principles, what I believe in. So why would those companies hire outside people to tell them to embrace principles I don't believe in? Congress must protect the financial future of Americans from the foreign-owned duopoly that answers to no one.
There are moments that shape an organization's future. A policy shift, a crisis or investigation, a market shock. When that moment hits, the clock starts. Markets move in minutes. Regulators, employees, and customers respond instantly. Narrative helps leaders respond with pace, engage stakeholders with precision, and position brands with perspective. So when challenges emerge, you can navigate complexity and lead with clarity before the narrative is defined for you.
$1996, right? 1996, right? Okay. Hey, welcome back to 535. I'm Paul Kane of Notice. I am joined here by the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Worcester, as they like to say.
You got it right.
I got it right? Was the accent decent?
Yeah. I love when people call my office to complain and they say they're from Worcester. That gives it away.
Out of towners. First elected in 1996.
Correct.
So long ago that people don't even remember that you beat a Republican.
I did.
There were 2 Republicans in the Massachusetts delegation from the 94 wave.
I beat a guy named Peter Blute, who was a 2-term Republican. This is when Newt Gingrich was Speaker, and my tagline was, if you wouldn't vote for Newt, why would you vote for Blute?
That was, I had just got here as a young cub reporter, and there were 2 Peters from Massachusetts. The other was
Peter Torkelson.
Torkelson, yeah.
It doesn't rhime with Newt, so I don't know what I would have done if I ran against him.
Okay. Mr. McGovern has been the top Democrat on the House Rules Committee since what year?
Since like 2000. Well, since I can't remember now. When Louis Slaughter passed away. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a little less than 10 years.
Yeah.
He's been on the committee for.
It was 2001.
Since 2001. But we'll get to that committee.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't appreciate about you, because so much of your focus is on the Rules Committee and it's, somewhat arcane stuff, is you have a personal passion project for policy. Hunger, nutrition, for the poor working class people. Tell me about how did you make that your thing? How did that start?
Well, when I was in college, I worked my way through college working for George McGovern, no relation, from South Dakota, and that was one of his passions. But then when I got elected to Congress, I began to meet people who were having trouble affording food. And I volunteered at a food pantry, and I talked to the people who came in, and they defied stereotype. So there were people who had no jobs, but then there were people who were working full time and having trouble putting together a budget to provide enough food for themselves and their families. And I thought that was wrong. We live in the richest country in the history of the world, and there are 48 million of our fellow citizens who are hungry or food insecure. We should be ashamed of that. And hunger is a political condition. And by that I mean we have the money. I mean, we know what to do. What we lack is the political will. And I've been trying to get the political will mustered here where we would focus on that issue and end it once and for all.
What is your most important policy change that you are trying to make right now, and how would that directly impact the 48 million?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things we need to do, but one of the things that I just recently did is introduce legislation in the House. Bernie Sanders did it in the Senate to call for universal school meals in our schools and to increase the reimbursement rate for school meals. Because I want to make sure kids not only have access to food, but we want to make sure it's nutritious food. And one of the things that my Republican colleagues seem to miss is that if you were to do what I'm telling you to do, it costs a little bit of money up front, but it saves you a boatload of money in the long term. My sisters are school teachers. Kids come to school who are hungry, they don't learn. If you don't have access to good food, you end up with long-term health conditions that are very, very costly. I taught in an emergency room at a hospital in my district, and a doctor introduced me to a woman who was there because she's taking her medication on an empty stomach. She couldn't afford her medication and an adequate diet. I mean, this is the United States of America.
Sort of ethnic, racial data on this. You know, if you're talking about 48 million people, I assume that the numbers would go in every direction in terms of, you know, poor working class white people, Black, Latino.
I mean, the majority of people,
America.
The majority of people on food stamps, you know, look like you or me. And you know, so when you hear people say that this is a program that mostly caters to minority populations, that's just a lie. It's, you know, it's white people mostly, and it's a lot of working people. So a lot of the people on the program are working, sometimes working multiple jobs, and they still don't earn enough to be able to put groceries in the fridge, and I think that's wrong.
Do Republicans, are there some Republicans anyway who sort of understand this? And we've seen changing political coalitions in the last 10 to 15 years. And, you know, the white working class voters tend to now vote Republican, and especially if they are in more rural, ex-urban areas, they're Republicans. And that's where you're saying almost a majority of the recipients of federal food benefits are coming from. So are there some Republicans that you have been able to sort of make some odd coalitions with on this?
But you're right, the stereotype is this is an urban issue, and that's just not true. It's also very much a rural issue. And over the years I've worked with people like Senator Bob Dole and Senator Elizabeth Dole, who were really good on this. I'm looking for the Bob Doles and the Elizabeth Doles right now. I mean, I have a lot of colleagues that I work with from the Midwest, Republicans, who say that they care deeply about this issue and they don't want to cut nutrition programs, and yet when push comes to shove, they vote to cut the nutrition programs. I mean, we have a farm bill that maintains close to $200 billion with a B, $1 billion cuts to the SNAP program. I mean, I find that immoral. And I have colleagues on the Agriculture Committee, I also serve on that committee, who know better. And they go along to get along. This is what Trump asked them to do, and they're doing it. But they are hurting their constituents.
This is something that was actually enacted last year, right?
In the big ugly bill, and we tried to fix it in the farm bill that came out of the House. And not only did they not fix it, they won't even allow us to offer an amendment to fix it.
Explain what those cuts actually are doing in date. Are they taken effect yet? Are people feeling the impact already with those?
So the worst of the cuts are going to take effect next year. But some of the changes in the program that they made have already taken effect. And millions of people across this country have lost their benefits. You know, I mean, so the new work requirements, new red tape, new reporting requirements, all that stuff, you know, have started to come into place, and people are now losing their benefits. Millions of people have lost their benefits. And that's before we get to the big $200 billion cut that's going to hit next year, and that's going to be devastating. Look, if you're a kid who's hungry, you can't learn at school. If you're a senior citizen who can't afford your groceries, you're taking your medication on an empty stomach. If you're a worker who is hungry, you are less productive in the workplace. It is so short-sighted and so stupid for us not to address this issue. You know, I'm at a loss for words, but this is a fixable problem.
Okay. You've got the Universal School Meals Program Act, the Medical Foods and Formulas Access Act.
Food is medicine.
So, but you're talking about Bernie Sanders as your Senate co-sponsor. Is he working to sort of build that coalition to find the Bob Doles of the Senate?
Yeah.
Because if things go great for you, for Democrats, even if you win back the House majority and eke out a Senate majority, you still got to get over a filibuster and Trump's signature.
Yeah.
So what type of coalitions are they trying to get over there to make sure you can actually do this?
Well, Trump needs some things too, right? So, I mean, if we can win back the House and or the Senate or both, I think we have some bargaining ability here. But, you know, we continue to work. I continue to reach out to Republicans. I continue to try to plead with them, especially those who know better, you know, to join with us. By the way, you know, if I did a quiz of members of Congress about what the average SNAP benefit was, the overwhelming majority would fail. I mean, people don't even know. The average benefit is about $2 per person per meal. I can't even buy a cup of coffee in this building for $2. And that's what it is. That's the overly generous benefit that they rail about on the House floor and on the Senate floor. But we both are trying to reach out to Republicans to get them to join with us, on some of this legislation. And I think maybe if the political climate changes here a little bit, if the leadership changes, we're in a different situation.
Okay, next year, if you are in the majority on this policy front, do you think Donald Trump understands his coalition? And do you think on something like this, he might be willing to cut a deal to, these are his voters?
Well, I would like to.
Or, there are going to be some that say, don't give any victories to Trump. Don't give any victories that J.D. Vance, who wants to look like a populist, is going to care about. Are you going to be willing to try and cut some deals on these policies?
I'm willing to work with anyone. Look, Trump and I don't share the same values. I mean, his focus is on tax cuts for billionaires and multimillionaires. That's where his energy goes. My energy is going to go on to try to end hunger in this country. And so, look, if we're in control, we have some power, and we also have the ability to schedule things. Again, I would like to force people to vote on some of this stuff, because I think, maybe we can get a few Republicans to join with us, and reinstating the cuts to SNAP and improving the quality of meals that we give our kids at school, and expanding the school meals to be universal for everybody. I mean, I don't know how you can learn if you're hungry. And if we want to see a bright future in this country, we need a well-educated workforce, and that begins, at the earliest levels in school, and people need to eat in order to learn.
Is there something about labels and acronyms that makes government inaccessible? I know what you mean by SNAP, right. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. People used to just say food stamps. That both became kind of pejorative and also out of date, because most people are getting it on their phones anyway, or from an app. Is there some way to create names that are more accessible for the average voter to understand? Because most voters, if you're in Worcester, you're probably not going to SNAP. What is that? Is that little app that kids use?
And that's a good point that you raised. But here's the problem. I think it goes deeper than just the name, right? It is that we have people who intentionally, try to demonize programs that help the most vulnerable in this country. I mean, that they run for office, demonizing these programs. I mean, I was at a Dunkin' Donuts, and a guy was, yelling to a group of friends about how everybody on SNAP is an illegal immigrant. And I, got my coffee and went over, and I said to him, I couldn't help but overhear you, but that's just not true. In fact, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you're not entitled to SNAP. In fact, most legal immigrants are not entitled to SNAP. The people on SNAP are people like us, people who look like us. And the increasing number of people on SNAP are working people. They're doing everything right, and you're here demonizing a program that provides them about $6 a day. That's it. I mean, come on. I mean, what the hell's wrong with this country that we cannot do more to end hunger? We're the United States of America.
Can your party make the case connecting this to the affordability agenda that everybody talks about?
Yes. Food's too damn expensive. I mean, a pound of beef right now is more expensive than the federal minimum wage. I mean, and by the way, if you want to talk about controlling healthcare costs, this is the way to do it. Make sure people have enough to eat. Make sure people have access to nutritious food. I have a bill on medically tailored meals. There ought to be food prescriptions. We ought to be encouraging our hospitals and our health centers to have food pantries and to integrate nutrition with their treatment. That's how you save money. Again, we're the best country in the world to live in if you need quadruple bypass surgery. We're not so good at preventing you from getting there. And what we need to do is kind of rethink our healthcare system, focus more on prevention, and that will be better for people. It'll also save us a boatload of money.
All right. Your other passion is the House Rules Committee. There are some big fans of that committee. It is I once got yelled at by your staff director for, I think I called it obscure. You know, secretly powerful. Why did you want to, I know you worked for Joe Moakley, who was a longtime chair of the committee in the 80s and 90s. Why did you want to be on that committee, and explain its power?
Well, in 2001, when Moakley was diagnosed with incurable cancer and told he had 3 months to live, he called me into his office and said, I need you to get on the Rules Committee. And I was like, let me think about it. He goes, no, you need to be on the Rules Committee. We need somebody from Massachusetts on the Rules Committee. It's the most powerful committee in the Congress. It's the oldest committee in Congress. You can get things done in on any issue in this committee, you know, so don't screw it up. And at the time, Dick Gephardt was the Democratic leader, had promised the next opening to somebody else. And Moakley went to Gephardt and said, Dick, I'm dying. And he said, what can I do for you? He said, anything. He said, put McGovern on the Rules Committee. But then Gephardt came to me and said he had promised it to Elsie Hastings. And he said, would you let me put Elsie on before you? There'll be another opening. And I said, yeah, but as long as I have seniority over Elsie when I go on the committee. And he agreed to that deal. But it was the best decision I ever made in my life, because quite frankly, it is a place where you can have your fingers on every issue. And I've been able to help my district and help causes that I care about. And when I was the chairman of that committee, we actually moved a bill forward to create a White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health, which was held in the Biden administration. It was very, very consequential. And I would like to be chair again, so I can, again, move the issues that I care deeply about forward.
One of the things about the Rules Committee chair is that whoever has the majority, the minority complains vigorously that the chair is not allowing an open house, and that they put out what we call closed rules, where there are just not a lot of amendments or zero amendments allowed on legislation. I think by your own staff's estimate, you only made in order 50% of amendments during the last Congress. Now, the Republicans so far have been more.
90% of Democratic amendments blocked, 82% of bipartisan amendments blocked, 70% of Republican amendments blocked. Look, the Rules Committee has become a place where democracy goes to die. I mean, consequential bills are coming to the House floor, and the Republicans are shutting everything down, so you can't offer an amendment, you can't change anything, you can't put in a comma across the T. And, you know, when I was chair, I tried to open things up. I tried to reverse what the Republicans had done prior to me, and we got over half of the amendments offered were made in order. And I went out of my way to try to make Republican amendments in order, even at the protest of some of my Democratic colleagues. But I really think this place should be a deliberative body. We ought to not be afraid to debate. And if I get the chance to be chairman again, I'm going to try to reverse, you know, the direction the Rules Committee has gone in under Republicans.
What are some of the things that you would like to do tangibly if you folks take the majority? I know there are several of you that are working on this, ranking member types like Joe Morelli from House Admin, Joe Neguse, your cohort on the Rules Committee, yourself. What are some of the things that could be in a, quote, reform agenda that you would try to push?
Well, clearly, you know, we need to focus in on ethics and corruption, and I'm working with, you know, Morelli and Neguse and others to figure out, you know, what direction we should move in. But when I was chair, I made some reforms, like, for example, we called it the McGovern rule. Even the Republicans called it the McGovern rule, where you can't bring a bill to the floor unless it's gone through committees of jurisdiction. So these idea that out of the blue, a bill mysteriously appears, and then next thing we're on the floor and there's been no review by the committee of jurisdiction. You know, we need to go back to empowering committees. I also had a 72-hour rule, which was that you don't bring any bills to the floor unless people have had at least 72 hours to look at it. And I also want to open.
Republicans have some version.
Yeah, but they don't always adhere to it, and anytime they want to, you know, follow my lead, I'm only too happy to do that. but I also want the Rules Committee to be a place where people can come and have at least a chance of having their ideas be taken seriously and having the ability to be able to debate those ideas on the House floor. This Congress under Republican leadership is like the Russian Duma. I mean, we're a legislative body in name only. I mean, we're not legislating when you're shoving, consequential legislation down people's throats and saying, take it or leave it. And the Rules Committee can change that. I think the Rules Committee can also be a place where, we can better promote civility, which is sorely lacking in this chamber right now.
All right, couple of these 1 minute, 5:35 1 minute questions. These are really quick, brief. Who's the smartest member of Congress?
Joe Neguse, Hakeem Jeffries. We have a lot of smart members of Congress.
Who's your favorite person on the other side of the aisle?
If I did that, they'd probably lose their election.
Former Republican.
Jackie Walorski, the late Jackie Walorski, we worked together on hunger issues. I did have a chance to work with both Senator Doles. There are a lot of Republicans that I actually like. I'm disappointed in them right now, but we have a cordial relationship and a good relationship with a lot of them.
What's your favorite phrase uttered here that you never hear back in your district?
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, or I yield back my time.
All right, you're going to yield back your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up later, a discussion with one of our favorite Hill reporters about what was actually accomplished this week. We'll be right back, 5:35.
Hi. So we're now at our third job together.
I love it. Wouldn't have it any other way.
You're like the house expert. So
you're like the Congress expert. I only learn from you. And now we get to do this together.
I know. We get to do 535, which is a fantastic, creative, exciting little project.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of excited to talk to leaders in a different capacity. We always ask them about, do they have the votes? What do their members think about this and that? But what is actually the policy that matters to them personally?
Love it.
National Association of Realtors Advocacy, working to expand access to housing and defend property rights so that more Americans can build generational wealth and prosperity through home ownership, a critical voice in nearly 1/5 of the U.S. economy, supporting 2 jobs for every single-family home sold, and generating more than $760 billion of property tax revenue for state and local governments each year. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
I enlisted as a medic to be there to help my patients, and after an injury, I found myself as a patient. I experienced post-traumatic seizures. Depression is a big one that comes along with it, PTSD. So I pursued my PhD in neuroscience and regenerative medicine. The coalition has helped fund my academic pursuits. They genuinely care about helping the vet in whatever way that they can. Through supporting the coalition, you're supporting some of the veterans that have the biggest needs.
Visit saluteheroes.org to learn more.
A simple blood test can detect Alzheimer's years before symptoms appear. Congress can connect Americans to early, accurate dementia diagnosis by supporting the Bipartisan Alzheimer's Screening and Prevention Act, allowing Medicare to cover blood-based Alzheimer's screening. Congress has acted to cover mammograms and other life-saving screenings. Now it can redefine Alzheimer's care, unlocking early detection and access to FDA-approved treatments when they work best. Congress, it's up to you. Paid for by the Alzheimer's Association.
Welcome back to the 535. I'm Brody Mullins here with Joe Maloney, new president of the Sports Betting Alliance. Tell me about the Alliance. Who are your members and what are you trying to do?
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thrilled to be here. Not so thrilled that I'm the second Maloney to appear on the show, and it's only day 3.
That's true.
So the Sports Betting Alliance is a trade advocacy organization of the 5 largest online sportsbooks and online iGaming operators. That's Bet365, Fanatics, BetMGM, FanDuel, and DraftKings. Three real core objectives, just to simplify it for you. We try to expand the map of legalized jurisdictions for legal regulated online sports betting. We try to expand the map for legalized jurisdictions for iGaming. And then we also, in legalized jurisdictions, try to defend against market restrictions, keep a regulated market that supports growth and innovation.
So I want to jump forward and then backwards. Great. Forward to next week, big hearing in the Senate Commerce Committee, the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. Tell us about that hearing and what will your role be?
Sure. So, I mean, it's not every year that you're going to find a hearing, at least federally, on the sports betting space. And there's a lot of reasons why we're continuing to see more of an examination and more scrutiny. It has a lot to do with normalization, it has a lot to do with legalization. A lot of the work that my organization has done, a lot of the work that a number of actors in the ecosystem, which we'll get to in a little bit. This hearing is going to be about integrity. Sports betting and integrity, and what does it mean? Integrity is this idea of fair play, that competitions aren't rigged. And of course, recently, you've seen some pretty high profile investigations of particularly wrongdoing on the part of athletes or executives or officials tied to professional sports, as well as the NCAA. So this hearing is going to kick the tires on where we are at. There's a number of witnesses that are going to come forward and talk about some of the protections and the regulated frameworks, but why the federal government, and specifically Congress, doesn't look at this frequently, because there hasn't historically been a role for the federal government. This is a state and tribal regulated product throughout the US. We're in 40 jurisdictions plus the District of Columbia when it comes to legalized sports betting, 31 jurisdictions when it comes to legal and online sports betting. But naturally, when something expands as much as it has since 2018 with the Supreme Court decision that invalidated a federal ban on states permitting this activity, Congress is starting to take a look. So in my estimation, since 2018, this is the third hearing in Congress on just the sports betting category. The swirl right now, Brody, is the entry of prediction market platforms. Right. Their ability to offer what's called sports event contracts. That's also bringing in another layer of examination because that is a federally regulated product through the CFTC.
So sticking with this hearing for a second, you mentioned the integrity of sports betting. In the press release that the Senate Commerce Committee put out, or that Marshall Blackburn put out, she mentioned the sports integrity, integrity of sports several times. How do you respond to that?
Sure. Well, look, we're going to meet the Senate committee and specifically Senator Blackburn, where she is. She has long communicated concerns about this. And specifically, we're going to communicate very clearly, we support her in her effort to examine this. This has to be an opportunity for our industry to come forward and talk about these protections in place. First and foremost, legalization is now the cop on the beat with this. You and I are both aware of so many incidences of integrity violations pre-2018, dating back to the Chicago Black Sox, to the Boston College men's basketball team, to Tim Donaghy, the referee in the NBA. Now we've got this activity out of the shadows. It's in regulated frameworks, and there's cops on the beat. You cannot police what you cannot see. So we've got to make sure that we discuss with the senator and the entire committee, by the way, this opportunity right now to really shine a light on this activity. And really now we're in a deterrent phase. A lot of what you're seeing isn't necessarily criminal activity, though there are obviously announced criminal investigations and indictments that have come down in some instances. But by and large, what you're seeing are gambling policy violations with leagues and with players. That's new because prior to 2018, there were no gambling policies to even violate because it was largely illegal. But now you're beginning to see some of these violations take place, and so we're in this deterrent phase. And the message to student athletes, the message to professional athletes, the message to club officials and executives, if you do this stuff, you're going to get caught. So this hearing, and again, based on the witnesses that are going to come forward, they're going to have that discussion about some of these redundancies and these resiliencies that are in place now in the legal regulated marketplace.
So let's talk about some of the players here. There's big trade associations, big companies, and big money involved. The American Gaming Association used to represent all the companies, and then some of your members moved off to start their own alliance. Show us how the policy or the players have changed here.
Sure. So we'll speak to that industry sort of moment from about 6 months ago here in a second. But the larger ecosystem right now in legal regulated sports betting, state regulators, over 8,000 across the country, professional leagues, amateur sports organizations such as the NCAA, and then you've also got operators, the types of online sports books, legal regulated that I represent. And then of course you've got elected officials at the state level and at the federal level. Elected officials at the state level have largely come together since 2018 and legalized this across those 40 jurisdictions. Federal elected officials now want to take a look, particularly with the entrance of prediction markets. There'll be a witness, former North Carolina Congressman Patrick McHenry, who will represent the Coalition for Prediction Markets. They will be there. That's your Kalshi and other actors in that space are going to be represented on the panel. Bill will speak on behalf of the state regulated operating system, my former boss, Bill Miller. And then of course you've got a regulator from Tennessee, from Senator Blackburn's home state. She actually is the executive director of the Tennessee Sports Wagering Council. Tennessee's a really interesting state. They legalized online sports betting without any commercial gaming or tribal gaming at all. Not even a casino in the state. They went first, they anointed this regulatory body. Mary Beth Thomas is the witness that will represent the regulator voice in this. And then there'll also be 2 additional witnesses. One, a CEO and founder of an integrity monitoring company. We are obligated by a regulatory mandate throughout the states to work with integrity monitoring tools and frameworks. So that will be a witness there. And then lastly, a public health critic of the category overall, Harry Levant, who's someone actually in recovery and is a public health counselor on gambling.
And where the senators on the subcommittee fall out on this? Do you have allies, opponents? Who do you know who's with you, who's against, or is it too early to say?
You know, Senator Cruz, the chair of Senate Commerce, has a big interest in this as well. And when some of the integrity investigations were launched, he's taken a particular amount of interest. So he's somebody that is very interested to learn more. But by and large, as our communications have worked down the dais, you know, again, a lot of members are in a seeking information sort of moment because this is still just such a new category for Congress to begin to examine.
Any idea where the public is on this? What sort of polling do you have to show what regular Americans think about whether there should be legislation or more regulations or federal regulations?
Sure. So generally speaking, the libertarian streak in this country is still pretty strong. When it comes to legalizing something such as gambling or cannabis, there's definitely I'm fine. If that's something that adults want to do, that's okay with me. So we're typically polling in the high 60s, low 70s on the question of legalize it and regulate it. Integrity continues to be in a vulnerability. There's still a percentage of Americans that remember a lot of these scandals from pre-2018. There's a number of Americans that have obviously paid attention to the news. When you have the FBI director go up to the Southern District of New York and stand there and announce indictments of, you know, former professional athletes and coaches, it draws a lot of attention to these issues. It's a sad day for sports fans, and so it remains a vulnerability. But again, this is where these exercises, particularly here in Congress, which will shine a big spotlight on this, we view it as an opportunity. We've got to come forward and tell our story about these redundancies, about these strong guardrails that exist within these state-regulated markets.
Joe, thanks so much for coming on. I'd love to have you on next week during or after the hearing to keep track of what's going on over there in the Senate. Joe Maloney, President and CEO of the Sports Betting Alliance. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a few minutes on 535. All right, Luke. All right, Luke, so tell us about how the sausage is made.
Well, generally, the issue is that so much of what's happening in various local economies is shaped by federal policy here in Washington. You know, what we're trying to do is really get at these sort of various advocacy groups and institutions that work sort of behind the scenes.
What we're talking about at 535 is sort of the sausage-making process, and it's not just the members on the Hill and their staff. It's the advocacy organizations, it's the trade organizations, it's the grassroots, it's the regular Americans, the business owners back home. This is the type of content that we're going to have on 535 that you're not going to find anywhere else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Welcome back to 535. I'm Brody Mullins. Delighted to have Robin Cook with Coinbase. Thanks for joining us. So we got a first ever on 535. We're trying to follow the Senate Banking Committee markup basically live on crypto. You were in the hearing. What's going on? Or the markup, what's going on?
Well, I mean, it's a busy day. That always happens right before a markup. But I think that a lot of conversations are happening in real time. And I think that there's a real possibility that we do end up with a strong bipartisan vote coming out of today. Regardless of that, a lot of work has been done going into this markup. And I think that this bill is ready for prime time. There has been a real concerted bipartisan effort that's occurred for both members and staff to really get in the weeds. And I think that they've done a lot of really good work and it's ready to go to the floor.
So tell us about the bill and sort of its path to where we are now. It zipped through the House. It was on its way to what looked like a pretty easy markup in Senate banking in January, and then everything went crazy. What happened?
Yeah,
well,
so
first tell us about the bill. What does the bill do?
So first of all, what does the bill do? It provides a regulatory framework at the federal level for crypto. That doesn't exist today. It brings new consumer protection, new regulation when none exists. So in that sense, it's transformative, I think, both for the industry and for consumers, and protects them regardless of where they live in a uniform way. What happened in January really actually can date back to what happened in October. There was a leak, which sometimes happens in Washington, of a draft document that wasn't intended to see the light of day, and that caused, I think, there to be a real closing of the ranks in terms of putting together important aspects of the bill. They thought they had it right. When they finally released it publicly, it turns out that they didn't as much, and so there needed to be some work done to solve for the technical problems that were in the language, and we just didn't have enough time as it was going to the markup. What also happened is that there's been this pretty public fight with the banking industry. There's been 4 months of pretty serious negotiations that have happened in the Senate and at the White House. Once those were resolved, and those other technical issues, so that the members could achieve what they were trying to do in January, we were here and able to get it ready to go.
And then after that point, there were negotiations between the crypto industry and the traditional banks. Did that yield a compromise?
So it did. What happened was the White House convened a series of meetings over the course of several months, as did several senators, and ultimately Senators Tillerson and also Brooks arrived at a compromise that I think protects bank deposit structures in really important ways. What they said is that if it's a crypto asset, you shouldn't be able to have it be functionally equivalent to a bank deposit. That protects bank deposits and ultimately enables the bill to move forward.
And I mentioned the word yield unintentionally, but yield is the key issue here. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it actually relates to a bill that happened last year, which is stablecoins. That's basically a digital equivalent of a US dollar. The banks feel like that could be a deposit substitute, and so they want to make sure that there isn't interest that's able to be paid in the same way that you would be able to get on a traditional bank account. What the compromise says is that if it's functionally or economically equivalent to a bank deposit, you can't have any sort of yield paid for it, but that if it's connected to real bona fide activity in the crypto ecosystem, that you can. And that enables the crypto industry to still be able to grow and develop and be able to contact consumers in the way that is key.
And if this bill were to come out and be bipartisan, that would be a huge step forward, be a surprise to me at least. Do you think you'll be able to get more than one Democrat, or how are things leaning?
You know, I can't speak for the members. I think it's going to be an interesting day. I think that there's a lot of conversations that are underway. I think that there are at least 5 Democrats on the banking committee who would like to get to yes on this. There are a couple of issues that are still being worked through, and so I think it's just really a question of whether those can be worked through before the end of the markup, and that'll dictate the numbers. I think the larger point, though, is that there are a lot of Democrats that are working on this bill. This bill is going to be bipartisan when it hits the Senate floor, and I think it's a product that both Republicans and Democrats can feel really good about voting for because it is protective of consumers.
And once this bill passes, assuming it does get through the committee today with however many Democratic votes, there are still some other sticking points that have sort of been pushed aside. One of them is the Democratic language for some sort of ethics reforms on the Trump family's investments in crypto. How does that get worded? Is that something that Democrats have to have in this bill, and how do you deal with that?
I think it is something that Democrats have to have in this bill, and a lot of work has been done behind the scenes to work on those issues. They're very close. Whether they get there before the end of the day today, I think is an open question, but I am quite confident that they'll get there before it goes to the floor.
There's another proposal that would potentially restrict federal officials from owning crypto. Is that another provision that could get in there? Will that be held for the Senate floor.
Yeah,
debate.
I mean, I think ultimately the language is probably going to get added on the floor just because it's a banking committee bill and ethics issues aren't dealt with in the banking committee. But I do think that real progress has been made on those questions and that it's going to get addressed.
I think something like 20% of Americans, 1 in 5, own some sort of crypto assets. How would their life change or their investments benefit if this legislation becomes law?
They would have a uniform consumer protection regime regardless of where they live. Today, if you live in New Jersey, you have a very different legal framework than if you live right across the river in New York. And that just doesn't make any sense for what is truly a global marketplace. You're going to have a uniform set of federal protections. You're also going to have a federal national regulatory structure which makes America competitive around the world. It's a global marketplace, and so 50 state regimes just doesn't make any sense.
Last question. I think there's more than 100 amendments pending. Is this going to be a late night for you?
You know, I don't know how many of them are actually going to get offered. You know, ultimately the Senate kind of works its magic in terms of you know, the process of making members feel like that they've raised the issues that they want to raise and want to get heard. But I definitely think it's going to be a long afternoon.
Robin Cook, Director of U.S. Policy for Coinbase, thanks so much for coming on. Come back next week and we'll talk about what's going on next. I'm Brody Mullins. Thanks for joining us on 535. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Rome. I've played many roles on TV and film, but today I want to speak to you as myself about a cause that's very dear to my heart. The Cancer Prevention and Treatment Fund provides free help to those who have cancer and those who wish to prevent it. They've also worked tirelessly on banning cancer-causing chemicals in our homes and neighborhoods. I want to thank them as a mom for protecting our families. Please donate today at the Cancer Prevention and Treatment Fund at stopcancerfund.com.
There are moments that shape an organization's future. A policy shift, a crisis or investigation, a market shock. When that moment hits, the clock starts. Markets move in minutes. Regulators, employees, and customers respond instantly. Narrative helps leaders respond with pace, engage stakeholders with precision, and position brands with perspective. So when challenges emerge, you can navigate complexity and lead with clarity before the narrative is defined for you.
He is what your show is called, The Decider.
It's Washington's hottest new show, and it has the Beltway buzzing.
Americans, they know BS when they see BS.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Brody Mullins.
Is this era ending and is a new era beginning?
And veteran strategist Lisa Camuso Miller.
Have you ever had to tell a client no?
Talk to the biggest and most influential players.
We wanted $1 million. He said, done.
Rewriting the rules of influence.
Business is going to be on the ballot. Congress needs to do their job.
They become lapdogs rather than watchdogs.
The people who never talk.
That's such a good question.
Talk to them.
It was kind of fun, actually.
It's Washington's only show by and for insiders.
Welcome to the Deciders.
Watch weekly right here on 535.
You're watching 535.
This is 535.
535.
You're watching 535.
535.
535.
535.
We're live on Capitol Hill, and 535 starts right now.
Welcome back to 535. This is Paul Kane of Notice. Joining me now is Gabe Fleisher. This is an appearance that is 11 years or so in the making. I first met Gabe at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute on a cold spring snowy day in Boston. Most people at that event didn't even know it was going to be outside.
Yeah, it's very cold.
And a lot of powerful people were upset that they weren't prepared for the winter. But in the Kennedy Institute, they have replicated the Senate floor and Senator Ted Kennedy's office in Russell. And I was looking around in that Russell office, and this kid, I'm sorry to call you a kid, but you were a kid.
It's true.
You were a kid then, comes up to me and is like, "Are you Paul Kane of the Washington Post?" And I look up, and there's this 7th or 8th grader there who's got a notebook, who's there to report, who's got the little press credential that we all had. And we had this great conversation, and I learned that Gabe at his parents' house in suburban St. Louis, was publishing Wake Up to Politics, his own newsletter, written, for, largely for people of his generation. By 2020, he graduates high school, comes to Georgetown University, continues to build Wake Up to Politics. He's now 2 years out of Georgetown. Wake Up to Politics has 60,000 daily readers right now. It's in Substack. You should go find it, register if you want, even become a paying member to get better access to it. He does incredible stuff. Just the other day, Gabe had an incredible breakdown of polling averages, taking Nate Silver's polling averages and showing that at this point right now, Donald Trump is polling where Joe Biden was after that debate performance and where Trump was after the January 6th insurrection. So it's really great. Now, we brought you here for something that is a great feature that comes in Wake Up to Politics. What has Congress actually accomplished this week? To be young again and not be as cynical as I am about where things are always breaking down and Congress doesn't get anything done. Every week, Gabe, usually on Fridays, puts something out when Congress is in session to explain what happened that we didn't cover at Notice, the Star as of next month, or in other outlets. It's really, I look forward to it because I usually learn something or learn everything new. All right, this week, what did Congress accomplish?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Paul. I'm very excited. Congratulations on 535, and I'm excited to be here, and definitely think there's a lot of synergy with kind of what you were talking about, what I try to do at Wake Up to Politics, so it's good to be here. Yeah, so Congress, I always try to find the things that maybe even people here in this building don't know actually Congress did this week. So there's a few things. One kind of interesting piece of legislation that passed the Senate this week by unanimous consent was the Baby Changing on Board Act, and that's a bill that's been introduced in a few sessions. It's Marsha Blackburn and Peter Welch, bipartisan bill to basically require every Amtrak train to have a baby changing table on board. And, it's been, I think, since the Obama era that every federal building's been required to have a baby changing board, but now this will be also on trains for Amtrak passengers.
And now that's, talk about the oddball coalition.
Right.
Peter Welch from Vermont, just about as liberal as they come.
Exactly.
Marsha Blackburn, pretty far, probably among the 10 most conservative Republicans. And, I guess that's how they build a coalition that gets you to 98-0. Do we know anything more about the House and the White House support?
So it's a good question. Don't know about the White House support, but actually a different version has already passed the House last year. Lauren Underwood, I know, is the main Democrat on the bill in the House. It's interesting, there's minor differences between the two bills and about what types of trains would be covered and exactly what the requirements would be. So there's like minor House-Senate differences, but there's basically been two bills that have passed each chamber and then now obviously need to work out their differences.
And was there resistance to this? Was there,
it's unanimous in both chambers, so seemingly not.
But it's taken a couple of years.
Yes.
I mean, it's not going to be that expensive, is it?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, no, I think it's kind of minor expense. Many of them already have. It's not like they all don't have, so it's only kind of the kind of oldest kind of trains, kind of the last trains that are still kind of holding out, and there's been kind of complaints for years from Amtrak passengers who, expected, like there are on planes, like there are in many buildings, they could go on board and then change their babies, only to find out they can't. And so this is Congress trying to fix that issue.
All right, what else?
So another very interesting resolution in the Senate that got a little bit of coverage this week was from Senator John Kennedy to require basically during government shutdowns. Obviously, we've had a lot of government shutdowns this year, very long government shutdowns. And, there's always around the shutdowns, I think there's this idea, when there are many government workers going without pay, why are the people in this building, why are they getting paid? Not the staffers, but the members themselves continue to be paid. Some of them kind of forfeit their salaries during the shutdowns, but they're still technically receiving them. And so this was a resolution that would basically hold back their salaries during the shutdown. They'd still get the money when a shutdown ends, but this is only in the Senate to basically not pay senators during shutdowns.
This is really deep in the weeds, but I mean, this goes back to like English government and the Parliament and making sure that the king could not withhold Parliament's pay. And this was set up in the 1790s or early 1800s. And so therefore, it was meant that like you couldn't have the executive branch just deciding, you know what, I'm not going to pay Congressman Fleisher next week. So it's just essentially Congress will always get paid, and yet you can have a 43-day shutdown in which no federal worker gets paid, but Congress is still collecting their pay.
And it's interesting, you mentioned kind of the long lineage of kind of conversations about pay. I mean, this was something they were literally thinking about at the Constitutional Convention. Like you talked about, like, not only should the president be able to take members of Congress pay, but who's going to be deciding members of Congress salaries? Obviously it's Congress themselves. Feels like a bit of a conflict of interest. And so one of the first 12 amendments that was proposed to the Constitution, was supposed to be part of the Bill of Rights, was to prevent Congress from raising their own salaries in session. That didn't end up getting ratified until the 27th Amendment in the 90s, but was literally proposed by James Madison 200 years earlier. But now, because of the 27th Amendment, which has been ratified, this resolution would not take effect till the next Congress, because Congress can't change their own pay while they're in session.
And that's the thing. They're saying that even if to withhold their pay would be changing their pay.
So you can imagine some random member of Congress like, I want to get paid, and they sue under the 27th Amendment. Don't think we've ever had a 27th Amendment related lawsuit, but
well, there's a very obscure
you're right,
lawsuit
you're right, actually, yes.
that's happening right now. The
point.
Former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, on behalf of a bipartisan group of former members and a couple of veteran members, is actually suing to say that the lack of a COLA, they haven't raised the salary here since 2009 for members, and at least in the even year, they're often withholding this mandated increase. They withhold it before they've had an election, which Cuccinelli has argued, and the judge in the case seems to be thinking like, oh my God, I don't want to be the guy that says Congress gets more money. It's very unpopular, but the law is pretty clear. So,
no,
all
that's
right.
a good point, yes.
What else did Congress accomplish?
Another very interesting bill so that was the Senate. Going back over to the House, there was the NICS Data Reporting Act, which was passed this week. This is a bill by Thomas Massie, who's obviously been in the news a lot lately and is kind of fighting the political fight of his life right now, but still, interestingly, the Republican leadership putting up a bill of his for a vote, and this passed by voice vote in the House. And basically, this would require the Justice Department to report on racial disparities, and NICS is the federal gun background check system that the DOJ has, and require them to report on racial disparities and who's getting rejected when they're going through gun background checks to see if there's any kind of racism in the system going on in terms of who's getting rejected. And I just love this sort of bill, because I think, like you were talking about, the kind of unusual coalitions. You think about, this is a bill that kind of marries anti-racist, democratic principles and pro-Second Amendment Republican principles, which kind of gets everyone together for Republicans to kind of be doing like a DEI-esque bill and Democrats to doing a pro-gun rights bill, and everyone's voting on it together. So it kind of hits everyone just in the right place that they all voted for it.
And for the alphabet soup version, NICS is the National...
I think it's Instant Criminal System, I think?
Yes. Okay. It's meant to be the instant background check system to make sure that criminals aren't buying guns. A few years ago, after one of the mass shootings, there was a congressional modest bill called Fix NICS that was trying to make sure that the background checks were worked out well. This is my chance to plug a great Notice story by my colleague Reese Gorman, who was at an institution of institutions in Washington, the Tune-In, the other night, and witnessed Rand Paul's son accosting Mike Lawler, Republican congressman from New York, with some very anti-Semitic actions and behavior about the Thomas Massie primary. And that primary that is the next week in northern Kentucky has turned into a lot of racial ethnic underbrush, really blowing up on both sides of the Trump-supported opponent to Massie. And it really has lit the fires. And yet, here he is on this bill, working with the coalition that, on something that the Congressional Black Caucus would probably support.
Fascinating, yes.
Yeah.
So,
all right, what else? What else?
So we got two resolutions, both in the House and Senate, very similar resolutions. Obviously, the president right now is in China, been meeting with Xi Jinping. It's a very important summit. And it's been interesting. I mean, you've written a lot about this in the last few years, kind of Congress really ceding their influence in the foreign affairs space to the executive branch. Obviously, we see this with the Iran war, but we see it in a lot of places. Used to be not uncommon for Congress to pass bills or resolutions, trying to sway foreign policies, become more and more unusual. So I thought this was interesting. Both chambers passed resolutions basically encouraging the president to bring up, while he's meeting with Xi Jinping, this issue of different kind of political prisoners, basically prison in China, a few Christian pastors who've been imprisoned, Jimmy Lai, who's the Hong Kong pro-democracy media publisher, democracy activist, media mogul in Hong Kong, he's been imprisoned. And I thought that was an interesting example of, it's a non-binding resolution, so it might not be much, but it's still an interesting example of bipartisan, unanimous, both chambers, kind of calling on the president to do something in the foreign affairs realm, which they've kind of been doing less and less in recent years.
And look, these non-binding resolutions are often taken very seriously back in the nations of, there was a dispute trying to get just a non-binding resolution to declare the Turk slaughter of Armenians, to call it a genocide. This was not going to be a State Department finding. It was just going to be a congressional resolution, basically printed paper. And the lobbying fight went on for more than 20 years over whether or not they would do that, because those countries were very vested in having Congress say, this was a genocide, or this was not. Adam Schiff, who had the largest number of Armenians in his district, became the lead sponsor of it, and he got that resolution passed in the middle of Trump impeachment 1.0. It was a very crazy, weird moment of full life circle for him. All right. What else do we got?
Yeah, so last thing is not a bill that's been passed yet, and I should say all those were passed except for the shutdown resolution. That's was a 99-0 cloture vote. It's probably not much need for cloture, but that one's still advancing. The other ones have passed. This is a bill we're going to be seeing a vote on soon through a process that both you and I have written about a fair amount. It's kind of the discharge petition process that's had quite the renaissance in this Congress. We went years with no discharge petitions, which are basically if 218 members of the House sign on to a discharge petition, they can force a vote on a bill, even if the Speaker does not want a vote on that bill. And there was basically none for most of the 21st century. There's been 6 this Congress. The 6th reached 218 signatures this week, which is the most ever, tied for the most ever. This goes back to the 1930s when the modern discharge petition was created.
And there were 2, I think, in 2024?
Yes, I think 2 in the last Congress.
So we're up to 8
yes,
in a little
which is unheard of in kind of the modern era.
Really unique thing. I'm going to test you out here. So its 218th signature yesterday was Kevin Kiley, formerly a Republican from outside Sacramento, who's now an independent and running for re-election in a tough district as an independent. It's got 218 signatures, but there are actually only 215 people supporting it.
Yes.
Explain that.
When you sign on to a discharge petition, even if you have died or resigned or left the House, it stays in stone. It's if you've signed the petition, you've given it one more signature, and that stays. So even though, as we know, there's been many deaths and resignations and churn this Congress, but even the people who have left and are no longer members and might not even be alive anymore, they are still on that petition.
That bill will be going forward on the backs of Eric Swalwell, Phyllis McCormick, both of whom resigned in disgrace, and David Scott, who passed away last month or earlier this month. Now, usually what happens once you hit that 218, there are a lot of people in the majority who are probably secretly wanting to support this. So do we think that there will be larger number of Republicans that come out and support this?
Yeah, and so this bill, just to say it, it's for Ukraine aid. It's about $1.3 billion in Ukraine aid for this bill. And yes, I think you're exactly right. You can look at, it always hits exactly 218, and the discharge petition expires. Someone else can sign after that. But you look at the votes for past, when this has happened in the past, and it often gets up to 235, 245, 250, and certainly looking at, obviously, Ukraine votes over time have gotten more and more partisan and lopsided, but we've still seen generally more Republicans than just the handful who signed on the petition support it when it's actually come to the floor in the past. So I would expect higher vote than that when it comes to
and
the
it was believed at one point that was like a tough issue for Republicans in primaries. After they passed the big national security supplemental 2 years ago, which included a huge chunk of money, maybe $100 billion for Ukraine, not a single Republican suffered any political consequence in their primary.
Except Kevin McCarthy, you could argue, suffered consequences.
Yeah. Yes.
But
well,
yes.
That is true. All right, everybody. We are coming down to the end. This is our last segment for our launch week. I want to thank you for watching. I want you to come back next week. On 5:35, we're going to have guests that include Vermont Senator Peter Welch on his ideas on how to reform FEMA. Congresswoman Amelia Sykes will join us on her Momnibus Act to help improve black maternal health. Marlon Stutzman, conservative from Indiana, is going to be talking about gas tax relief, China, and tariffs. Greg Landsman from Cincinnati is going to talk about the Great American Comeback legislation he's working on. And a congressional magician, Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, will be here to perform some magic. Now, with the House canceling votes Tuesday, we have a slight programming change. We are going to be back on Wednesday. Thank you for watching. If it is important for us, if it's important to the 535, it's important to us. On behalf of all of us here, I will ask unanimous consent on a motion to adjourn until 11 a.m. Wednesday. Somebody yell aye. No objections. So ordered. We'll see you on Wednesday.